I'm useless. I've never been good at anything since I was a child. It's expected of her bloodline, they said. How is she this bad? That was my reputation. When my mother died, my father, the king of the Cloven Kingdom, found me and made me a princess. However, I was still useless. She's kind, but how is she so useless? She is not good at anything, they said. When the empire overtook the kingdom, I became a maid but remained the same useless person I had always been. Mary, someone called. She replied, yes? Did you actually clean? What is with all this dust? The emperor did not leave any member of the royal family alive, so I had to hide my identity to survive. Do it properly, Mary replied. Yes, I'm sorry. I was now a maid of the imperial palace who handled all kinds of chores. The one good thing about me was probably my optimistic personality. A sick prisoner. I need to take care of him? Mary asked. Who else will do it if it isn't you? You don't want to? Mary replied, no, as she trembled slightly. Don't work too hard because he's a prisoner. But then she remembered her mother's words. My baby, it does not matter what you become in the future, but I want you to be a kind person. No, I need to take good care of him, or else he'll suffer a slow and lonely death. I won't leave him alone, she thought as she ran toward him. A guard from behind said that it was useless. The man was coughing blood. Mary asked, are you all right? Looking at him reminded her of her mother. We might have been poor, but we were a happy family. I miss her, she thought as she wiped away her tears. The man thanked her. Mary replied that she was only doing what she needed to do. You could have just left me. I am very grateful. I want to pray one last time for you, he said. He then asked for her name. Mary, she replied. I see. Then, Mary, do you have a wish? Mary paused. A wish? Anything is fine. I've always wanted to be a capable person, she answered. The man asked what she meant by capable, explaining that there were many different kinds of capability. Mary thought for a moment. Well, first I want to be able to do my job as a maid properly. I want to be good at art, music, crafts, and cooking. I want to be skilled in archery, dancing, and card games too. I want the ability to cure illnesses like a doctor and be able to catch bad people as well. Is that too much? The man replied that everyone had many wishes. Yes, you are right. But if you had all those abilities, what would you use them for? Mary answered that she would live the life she had always wanted. The life you always wanted? She nodded. Everyone would have a different answer. Some would say success is more important, whether it is money, accomplishments, or the results of their hard work. If you asked 100 people, each of them would give a different answer. If I can, I want to make everyone happy, she replied. That's my wish. The man looked at her before asking once again, what is your name? Like I said earlier, I am Mary. No, I am asking for your real name. My real name? She thought. No one here knows my identity. He's just asking. But God would like to make your wishes come true. Tell me your real name. Mary flinched before finally answering, Marina. As she left, she quietly closed the door behind her and thought that she would probably never see that man again. The guard later told her that there was no need for her to come anymore. Mary thanked him and wished him good work before returning. Quickly go to sleep, Mary. You need to wake up early tomorrow and work hard. I'm going to get scolded all day tomorrow, she thought. As she fell asleep, she remembered the man's words. If I become capable at my work, just like the man said. Meanwhile, the man offered his final blessing. May God hear your wishes. May he grant the wishes of this girl. And then he passed away. I pray with all my heart for Marina de Brandylaw Clown. May her wishes come true. For the last of the royal bloodline of the Cloven Kingdom. Marina, where am I? What kind of tea is it today? It was Da Hong Pao tea today, young master. Da Hong Pao? Yes, it was a type of oolong tea from the north of Fujian. Ah, how delicious, just as he would expect from her. It was a dream. She thanked him and said that the scent of the tea would make it even more delicious. He replied that it would not be this delicious if someone else had made it. Viola, you are my greatest treasure. As Mary woke up, she immediately wondered who Viola was. Such a realistic dream, she thought. Da Hong Pao, what was that? She felt like she somehow knew it. Goodness, there must be something wrong with her today to think she knew the flavor of a tea she had never even heard of before. She quickly reminded herself that she needed to get ready. Mary, you have to work hard today. You got this, she said to herself. Jane then told Mary that Maid Susan would be angry as usual if she made a mistake and that it would not end with a simple scolding. Mary replied that she would do her best. If only she could become capable like that girl Viola from her dream. The girl from her dream was the perfect maid. Cleaning, laundry, and of course, she was perfect at washing dishes, tea time, taking care of documents, and practically everything else. What would someone even call a person like that? She was the master of all maids. If Mary could become even half as capable as her, she would be happy. Now, let's start, she thought. My goodness, what is this? As she noticed the dirt around her, she became shocked. Oh no, was it always this dirty here? Why didn't she notice it before? She needed to quickly clean everything before Susan arrived. What should she do? There was so much to clean. She did not think she would be able to finish all of it in time. However, as she started cleaning, something felt strange. Why was work so easy today? Since she was able to instantly spot all the dirty areas, she did not waste any time at all. Before she knew it, the entire place was sparkling clean. Mary looked around in astonishment and wondered if she had really cleaned all of that herself. As she glanced toward the carpet, she thought that since the hallway was already clean, she could not help but notice how dirty the reception room was. She suddenly felt the urge to clean that carpet as well. Just then, someone came from behind and shouted at Mary, asking what she was doing and whether she was aware of how busy everyone was because of Count Lexington's arrival. However, after seeing the area, the woman suddenly became confused and asked what was going on and why everything was so clean. Turning toward Mary, she asked who had helped her. Mary replied that she had cleaned everything alone. This Mary? Clean all of this alone? After a moment of disbelief, she told Mary that she understood and ordered her to go help in the kitchen. As Mary headed toward the kitchen, the woman could not help but think that she would keep an eye on Mary for a while. Still, Mary was not the kind of child who would lie. While Mary was cleaning in the kitchen, the other maids began whispering among themselves. That was Mary, right? They thought so, but they could not understand what had happened. Since when had this child become so good at cleaning? One of the maids then called out to Mary. Mary asked if she needed something. The maid replied that it was nothing and that she could see Mary was working hard. They would handle the rest, so Mary should go and take a break. Mary was left completely confused. She had been complimented? She could hardly believe it. She was not this capable, so what was happening to her? Did that man's prayer actually come true? No way. She did not know what was happening, but her abilities today felt completely different. She secretly wished that this miracle would last longer. Later, Mary was told that she would need to practice serving tea whenever she had the chance. She was praised for her work and told that she had really improved. They hoped to see her continue working hard tomorrow as well. Mary became excited. Serving tea meant serving nobles, a task usually reserved for middle-class maids. She thanked them sincerely and promised to work even harder. As Mary poured the tea and bowed gracefully, everyone was impressed. It was wonderful. They asked where she had learned to pour tea so elegantly and whether she had served tea before. Mary could only wonder what was happening to her. Had that man's wish really come true? Soon, the other maids began thanking her for her help and asked her to take care of them as well. Mary's life changed so suddenly that it all felt like a dream. However, one day, something happened that changed her entire life once again. She had another dream. Working at another place? Yes, she was told that the Empire's congregation banquet was coming up. They were lacking maids and had asked for help, and it seemed that Mary would need to go and assist them since everyone here was relying on her now. The Empire's anniversary banquet was the biggest event in the entire Empire. For a whole week, there would be a grand festival filled with celebration. This year, however, the day of the event would overlap with the anniversary of the Empress's death, the mother of the Crown Prince. To commemorate the late Empress, they would be redecorating the Rose Garden of the Rose Palace. Mary asked if she needed to decorate the garden herself. She was told no, that she only needed to oversee the gardeners. Mary replied that she understood. When asked if there was a problem, she quickly answered that it was nothing at all. She then thanked them and headed toward the garden. Redecorating a garden? Mary thought. Did her dream from yesterday have anything to do with today? As she arrived, she overheard a conversation. It seemed like someone was gathering inspiration. The wind was being felt, and the next work would apparently be inspired by it. There were high hopes for Fiona, the garden seeker. Mary politely introduced herself and asked them to take care of her, explaining that she had come from the Lily Palace. The man welcomed her warmly and warned her to be careful not to get injured by the tools lying around. Because of her dream, Mary had expected to have a lot of work to do, but there was nothing particularly difficult here. How pleasant, she thought. It was actually pleasant to work in a place like this. The man then asked whether she had eaten. Mary replied that she had not eaten yet. He told her that even if she was busy, she should still take care of herself because she was already so skinny. He explained that he worried about her because she reminded him of his daughter back home. Mary commented that landscaping must be a difficult task. The man replied that of course it was difficult. Trimming branches, cutting trees, moving flower pots, and arranging the entire garden could practically be considered a grand construction project. Even so, he said that it was fun. As gardeners, their wish was to give visitors happiness through their work. A person that gives happiness, Mary thought. She wanted to become someone who could make others happy too. The gardener then admitted that he was worried. The sculpture of the third empress was the problem. It stood at the center of the garden and served as its main attraction. Since it was a sculpture of the third empress, the crown prince would naturally pay special attention to it. The crown prince had suffered greatly when his mother passed away years ago. If the prince disliked the sculpture, how would they handle his wrath? Hearing this made Mary nervous. The crown prince. What a horrifying title. Crown Prince Rael. Although he had been born out of wedlock, he had managed to become crown prince through his own strength and abilities. The amount of blood he had shed was said to be immeasurable. 3 years ago, he had searched for her while holding a sword covered in blood. If she had not disguised herself as a maid, she would have certainly lost her life back then. She still remembered his cold voice asking where Lady Marina was and ordering everyone to find her. His eyes had held no trace of mercy. That was the day the crown prince conquered her kingdom, and now she was the only remaining bloodline of the Cloven Kingdom. Realizing he had spoken too much, the gardener apologized. Since they had finished eating, they should return to work. Mary nodded in agreement, but she could not stop thinking about helping him, even if only a little. How could she help? Perhaps her ability could be useful? She had thought she gained abilities because of her dreams, but it was not working this time. She had expected to dream about Fiona again, yet she had no dream at all the previous night. As she handed over tools and observed the garden, she could not shake the feeling that something was missing. It should not be like this. Something truly felt incomplete. Yet despite that, the sculpture was still beautiful. As she stared at it, Count Gilbert arrived. The gardener thanked the Count for coming. Count Gilbert asked whether everything was proceeding smoothly. He complimented the French style of the garden decoration and reminded them that it needed to be elegant and sophisticated for their great crown prince. The gardener promised to keep that in mind. However, when the Count's attention shifted toward the sculpture of the third empress, his expression immediately darkened. What was that? Was that really supposed to be the sculpture of the third empress? There was not a single trace of elegance or sophistication in it. As he stared at the statue, his anger exploded. He shouted, asking whether they had gone mad. This was supposed to be a sculpture of the third empress, the mother of the crown prince. Were they seriously claiming that such a messy thing was meant to represent her? He angrily demanded to know if they had extra lives to spare. Would they still be smiling if their heads rolled off their shoulders? If they wished to avoid the prince's wrath, they needed to fix it immediately. There was not much time left before the festival, so they had to repair it right away. After the Count stormed off, the gardener and workers could only panic. What were they supposed to do now? There was not enough time to bring in a more experienced sculptor. As everyone returned to work in despair, Mary quietly thought about Gardener Hans. How could she help him? Mary could not sleep that night. Jane noticed and asked if something was wrong. Mary apologized and said she did not mean to wake her up. Seeing the rain outside, Jane asked why she was going out. Mary replied that she was only going to get some fresh air and would be back soon. As she stepped out into the rain, she suddenly heard a familiar sound. Wait, this sound? It was Sir Hans. But at this hour? Mary quickly approached him and told him that he would catch a cold and should come inside. Hans was surprised to see her and asked what she was doing in the garden. Mary explained that she had been worried about him and asked him not to overwork himself in such weather. Hans smiled and admitted that it would not be good if he caught a cold. He said he would return inside and told Mary that she should do the same. However, Mary continued thinking about how much she wanted to help him, even if it was only a little. If she were Fiona, what would she do? What are you sculpting today, Fiona? Is it the sun, the moon, or perhaps even the world itself? Or could it be nothing at all? Fiona always looked so determined whenever she sculpted. After all, she created the finest garden statue. Isn't that right, Fiona? Suddenly, something clicked in Mary's mind. As she clenched her hands, memories and feelings she did not fully understand began surfacing. Elsewhere, preparations for the festival were being reported to Crown Prince Rael. His subordinate informed him that everything was moving forward smoothly and that since this would be the first festival after the end of the war, he would ensure that no problems arose. Crown Prince Rael calmly asked whether there was anything else to report. At first, the answer was no, but then the man remembered a small incident involving the third empress's rose garden. He explained that the sculptor had failed to capture the beauty of the third empress, so he had scolded him and ordered the sculpture to be redone or punishment would follow. Crown Prince Rael immediately questioned what he was talking about. The man became confused and asked what he meant. Rael coldly replied that he had never ordered anyone to commission a sculpture of his mother. His only order had been to tidy the garden, yet unnecessary work had been created. He also questioned why threats of punishment had been made. As the pressure in the room intensified, Rael reminded him not to forget that their swords existed to vanquish enemies, not to intimidate their own subjects. The man quickly apologized and promised to remember those words. After dismissing him, Rael remarked that the man's intentions were obvious and that he might need to get rid of him soon. Rael then asked Viscount Almond, or Royal Knight, whether he had anywhere else he needed to be. The Viscount replied that he did not. Rael then announced that he was going for a walk because he wanted to visit his mother. Wearing a cap to conceal himself from the rain, Rael quietly made his way toward the rose garden. It had been a long time. He could hardly believe that 10 years had passed since his mother died. As he walked through the rain thinking about her, he suddenly heard repeated banging sounds. What was that sound? Surely nobody was sculpting in this weather. Whoever it was would catch a cold working outside in the rain. He thought he should tell them to stop and get some rest. However, as he drew closer, he froze. For a brief moment, he felt as though he had entered another world. Before him stood the image of his mother. Rael, don't be afraid. Mother is here. Mother? He could hardly believe his eyes. Who was creating this sculpture? As he took a step forward, he suddenly stopped himself. No, he should not bother them. The next morning, everyone in the garden was shocked. Hans stared at the completed sculpture in disbelief. He was certain he had left it unfinished the night before. The workers gathered around him, praising him and saying that it was the best sculpture they had ever seen. Hans repeatedly denied the compliments. Nearby, Mary sneezed. Someone asked whether she had caught a cold. Mary admitted that it seemed she had and that she should have been more careful. Looking toward Hans, she asked about the sculpture. Hans firmly replied that he was not the one who had sculpted it. The statue perfectly captured the elegance of the Empress. It was not a work made merely to complete a task. Whoever created it had poured their very soul into it. Hans admitted that he could never hope to recreate something like that and wondered who the mysterious sculptor was. Mary quietly replied that she was simply glad it had been completed without any problems. Soon after, Viscount Almond arrived and asked who had been responsible for the sculpture. Hans admitted that he had been the assigned sculptor. The Viscount informed him that the Crown Prince wished to see him immediately. Hans trembled as he followed them. Meanwhile, investigators searched for clues. They reported that there was no male sculptor matching the description that had been given. Crown Prince Rael refused to believe it. He insisted that he had seen the person with his own eyes. When Hans was finally brought before him, he nervously bowed and begged the Crown Prince not to kill him because he had a family to care for. Rael ordered him to stand and explain that he had summoned him to offer a reward. He had seen the sculpture and found it brilliant. Rael told him to name any desire he had, and he would grant it. However, Hans clenched his fists and confessed that he was not the one who had created the sculpture. The masterpiece everyone admired was not his work. Rael immediately noticed the inconsistency, even pointing out that certain details did not match Hans's usual style. If Hans had not sculpted it, then who had? Hans explained that he did not know. Someone had come late during the night and finished the sculpture. It was as if an angel had appeared and disappeared without a trace. Some questioned whether the Crown Prince had perhaps seen incorrectly, since there was nobody matching the description he had given. Then the representative of the Suevian Duchy, Duke Orlan, spoke up. From what he knew, there were no famous female sculptors anywhere in the empire. Everyone agreed that it seemed impossible, yet Rael calmly replied that he knew exactly what he had seen. Duke Orlan then proposed another solution. He would personally try to find the sculptor himself. The others were surprised and asked if he truly intended to do that. Orlan replied that as someone loyal to His Highness, he could not simply sit back and do nothing. Besides, he admitted that he was extremely curious about the person who had secretly created such a masterpiece in the middle of the imperial palace. Yes, he was very curious indeed. As per his orders, it had been confirmed that her mother was dead and the child had been brought over. If possible, they were told to make sure she did not stand out and to keep her in a remote part of the palace. Marina, the princess of the Cloven Kingdom. Her father had been ashamed of her, and because of that, she was treated with contempt. She knew very little about the people within the palace, and because she was constantly reprimanded from every direction, she learned to live by avoiding the attention of others. It was her good fortune that she had managed to survive by disguising herself as a maid. When she heard that the Crown Prince was searching for a certain sculptor, she had been terrified. It had already been many years since the fall of the kingdom, and it still had not been confirmed whether Princess Marina was dead or alive. For a moment, she thought he had discovered her true identity. From now on, no matter what happened, she absolutely could not attract that prince's attention. Meanwhile, Hans thanked the heavens, saying that God must have heard their earnest prayers and sent an angel their way. They still did not know who it was, but they should be grateful. Hearing this, Mary quietly decided that just in case, she would do her best not to stand out anymore. As preparations for the festival continued, everyone talked excitedly about how much they were looking forward to it this year. It had been a great year for the farms, and since there had not even been a festival the previous year, the excitement was even greater. The head maid quickly reminded everyone that there was not much time left until the festival and ordered them to focus on their work. Mary hurried over to the Crystal Palace to receive her new assignment. Upon arriving, she immediately noticed a musical instrument. So this was a brass wind instrument. She was informed that the orchestra would be performing during the festival at the Crystal Palace. Hearing this made her wonder if she would discover a new power this time as well. Then she remembered her dream. "What are you doing? We are about to depart for Paris. If you keep lying around like this, we will be forever late. I am watching the scenery. Sister, don't you hear the music? The mountains, the sound of the wind, the sound of the flowing stream, the rustling of the trees, and the endless fields stretching into the distance. Is that right? I am curious, but we do not have time. Father is waiting, so let's hurry." "Yes, I understand." Then another name echoed through her thoughts. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Mary had never heard an orchestra perform before, but because this event was on such a grand scale, she felt she might have a chance this time. As she looked around, she noticed a piano. A piano. She used to love the piano. She wondered if it would be all right for her to play it for just a little while. However, she was told that it had just been tuned and could not be touched right now. The man then asked if she was the new maid who had arrived today. He introduced himself as Bahan, the palace's temporary orchestra concertmaster. Since the previous conductor had retired due to his weak health, Bahan had been conducting in his place. Mary introduced herself and explained that she was there to assist with this year's orchestra preparation. She could not help but think how impressive it was that someone so young had become the temporary concertmaster. Bahan noticed her disappointment and assured her that he would let her touch the piano later when they had some free time. He also told her that if she encountered any difficult problems while working, she could freely come to him. Mary thanked him. Soon afterward, everyone gathered for rehearsal. Bahan asked if everyone was present and announced that they would perform the symbolic piece they had been practicing. Since special guests would be attending the festival, he wanted a perfect performance. Everyone enthusiastically agreed. Even though it was only practice, Mary was amazed that she could hear an orchestra perform in person. To enjoy such luxury felt wonderful. However, as she listened carefully, something suddenly felt wrong. The second violin and the horn were off. The overall tempo did not match. The tremolo section was not being handled correctly either. But how could she possibly know something like that? Then she remembered. The Mozart dream. Still, she could not help but wonder whether the palace orchestra could really continue performing like this. It did not seem like a simple issue of insufficient practice. In the first place, the song itself felt awkward and unnecessarily difficult. The fugue form was extremely complex and overly abstract. If they continued relying on such exaggerated techniques, the entire performance would simply sound messy. Eventually, Bahan called for a break. He then approached Mary and asked what she thought of their performance. Mary was surprised and asked whether he needed her to do something. Bahan explained that he was simply curious about how the performance sounded to an outsider and encouraged her to speak honestly. Mary hesitated before admitting that it felt somewhat messy. She quickly added that it was still grand and impressive, but she could tell that something was troubling him. Bahan smiled bitterly and asked if there really was nothing that frustrated her while listening. At that moment, the orchestra members began speaking among themselves. The truth was that this was not the piece they actually wanted to perform. It was the previous conductor's composition. Some of them suggested abandoning this frustrating piece and performing the piece Bahan truly wanted instead. Others argued that they could not do that. Even if it was unfinished, Bahan's composition was outstanding. The audience would surely enjoy his piece far more. After listening quietly, Bahan suggested that even if performing it was impossible, they could at least play through it once for relaxation. He then announced Symphony No. 1 in G major, the country, first movement. Begin. As the music started, Mary was completely captivated. The piece they had just performed earlier could not even compare to this one. It felt peaceful and warm. The music comforted her heart, and she wanted to remain in that moment forever. It was beautiful. However, after a while, Bahan stopped them. He explained that they could not progress any further than this. The orchestra members protested, saying that the music was so wonderful and asking whether they could at least continue into the climax. Bahan shook his head. The piece only had a country. It lacked life. He wanted life itself to melt into the composition. At present, only a vague melodic tune existed, and he was not sure how to complete the rest. He admitted that he wanted to finish it somehow, but he believed he had reached his limit. With that, he instructed everyone to return to practicing the previous piece. Mary felt disappointed. It was such a magnificent composition, yet it remained unfinished. If that piece could somehow be completed, imagine how lovely it would become. Everyone who listened to it would surely be happy. Mary desperately wanted to hear the rest. Then suddenly, a familiar melody began echoing in her mind. This melody, Mozart? Was this the life that Bahan had spoken about? As the music continued, her perspective shifted completely. The first movement, then the second movement, then the third movement. The melody refused to stop and continued expanding endlessly on its own. Before she realized it, the entire song had become complete. Great effort today, everyone. After the rehearsal ended, everyone thanked Mary for her help. Mary replied that she would organize everything before leaving and that she would see them all tomorrow. As the orchestra members gradually left the hall, Mary noticed something and stopped in place. She found herself staring at an unfinished musical score. It was the country, the first movement of Bahan's unfinished symphony. Bahan noticed her and asked if she needed something. Mary hesitated before explaining that there was something she wanted to ask him. Bahan encouraged her to speak freely. Mary carefully asked whether he would be willing to accept someone's help if they were somehow able to provide him with the completed version of the country. Bahan seemed surprised and asked if she meant receiving help from someone else. Mary awkwardly explained that she was speaking hypothetically. What if an angel descended from the sky and completed the piece for him? Bahan laughed softly and repeated the word angel. Mary quickly clarified that it did not necessarily have to be an angel. She simply meant that if someone were somehow able to help him complete the composition, would he be willing to accept it? Looking at her thoughtful expression, Bahan assumed she was trying to comfort him. He thanked her and admitted that he must have appeared very depressed lately. However, Mary insisted that she was being serious. Bahan then answered honestly, if someone could truly help him perfect that piece, he would be grateful. Mary cautiously asked if he would not feel bad about accepting another person's help. Bahan shook his head. Instead of being concerned about pride, all he truly wanted was to see the piece completed. More than anyone else, he wanted to hear the finished version himself. He explained that he could dedicate his very soul to completing that composition if only he knew how. Hearing those words relieved Mary. She understood now. Bahan genuinely loved the piece and only wished to see it completed. Curious, Bahan then asked why she was asking such strange questions. Was she planning to finish the piece for him? Mary immediately denied it, insisting that there was no way she could do something like that. After awkwardly ending the conversation, she wished him good work and said she would see him tomorrow. As she walked away, she continued thinking about what he had said. Since Sir Bahan wanted the piece completed by any means possible, she wanted to help him if she could. If she was capable of doing something, then she wanted to do it secretly without anyone finding out. If she simply wrote down the important sections and motives, then Sir Bahan would surely be able to complete the rest himself. Most importantly, she did not want to turn the composition into something that was no longer Bahan's. She hurried back and began writing as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, Crown Prince Rael was being examined regarding his condition. He was asked how his insomnia was progressing. Rael replied that there was not much difference. He had not been able to sleep properly for the past 23 days, and the previous night he had barely slept at all. The physician apologized that the results of the treatment were so poor, but Rael calmly replied that there was nothing more that could be done. The physician suggested increasing the dosage of medicine slightly, and Rael agreed. Just as the examination ended, a servant announced that the Chancellor had arrived. Rael ordered him to enter. The Chancellor burst into the room dramatically, declaring that he could no longer hold it in. Rael calmly asked what the problem was. The Chancellor immediately began talking about the mysterious sculptor. No matter how much he investigated, he could find absolutely nothing. Where had that person disappeared to? He then apologized before asking Rael if he was absolutely certain about what he had seen. Rael responded by asking where else the person could have gone. The Chancellor complained that this mysterious half-blood individual was causing him far too much trouble and that he was not going to let them off lightly once he found them. Rael told him to calm down, reminding him that he was trying to find the sculptor to express his gratitude, not to punish them. The Chancellor immediately agreed, but jokingly added that after causing him so much trouble, they deserved a punishment before receiving their reward. Then he remarked that this was the first person to give him such difficulty since Princess Marina of the Cloven Kingdom. Hearing her name caused the atmosphere to shift. 3 years had already passed since they began searching for that girl. The Chancellor admitted that he was completely speechless regarding where she could possibly be hidden. He wondered if she might actually be dead. Rael immediately rejected that possibility. No one had ever found her body. Marina de Brandy la Cloven, the faceless saint of Cloven. 3 years earlier, it was said that Princess Marina had quietly helped the people while remaining hidden from public view. She secretly gave her personal allowance to poor citizens and servants, and when she could not provide money, she would buy medicine and supplies for those in need. Her actions were never grand or flashy, but considering her own difficult circumstances as a neglected princess, they were remarkable nonetheless. Everything she did was for the people of Cloven, and because of that, she left a deep impression on countless citizens. Even now, many of the lowest classes within the empire had not forgotten Princess Marina. Yet the Chancellor could not understand it. If she were still alive, how had they failed to find her after all these years? They had searched the entire Cloven region and every neighboring province. In truth, because almost nobody properly knew her, it was as though she were a figure from someone's imagination. Marina had only stood as a princess within the royal palace for a short period of time, and she had spent most of it avoiding attention. Barely anyone knew what her face looked like. To make matters worse, the only known portrait of her had been destroyed during the chaos of the war. Nevertheless, despite her brief appearance in history, she had managed to inspire countless people through her kindness. The Chancellor admitted that she was an impressive person. Out of all the terrible people associated with the former kingdom, she was the only one he genuinely admired. Rail agreed that the people of Cloven had not forgotten her. That was exactly why she had to be found, no matter how long it took. The Chancellor acknowledged the order, but then asked a question that had been bothering him for years. What exactly would Rail do once he found Princess Marina? Surely he intended to kill her. Rail answered calmly that in the worst-case scenario, he would have no choice but to kill her. The Chancellor pointed out that she was innocent, yet Rail explained that the people of Cloven were still searching for her and placing their hopes in her existence. When the Chancellor heard Rail describe it as the worst-case scenario, he immediately asked whether that meant there was also a possibility that she would not be killed. Rail answered yes. The Chancellor argued that if the goal was to completely subjugate the people of Cloven, killing the last surviving member of the royal bloodline would surely be the easiest solution. Rail admitted that it could be viewed that way, but he still considered it the worst option. If he truly wanted to gain the hearts of the Cloven people, there was a far better plan. That plan was to make Princess Marina his. The Chancellor immediately understood. If Crown Prince Rail took Princess Marina as his wife, the people who longed for her would naturally submit to him as well. However, the Chancellor still had doubts. He asked whether it was really wise to proceed down that path when they knew almost nothing about the real Princess Marina. Rail seemed confused by the concern and asked what exactly he was trying to imply. The Chancellor pointed out that they had no idea what kind of woman Marina really was. Rail responded that he was the ruler of the empire. The only thing that mattered was whether something benefited the empire or not. His personal feelings were irrelevant. Finally, the Chancellor asked the most important question of all. What would happen if Princess Marina refused to become his wife? After a brief silence, Rail calmly gave his answer. When that time comes, he would have no choice but to kill her. All done. Mary looked over the pages she had written and felt relieved. They should be enough for Maestro Bahan to finish the rest of the composition on his own. She sincerely hoped that her help would be useful. As she carefully gathered the pages together, she reminded herself that she needed to leave before anyone discovered her. However, just as she was about to go, the piano suddenly seemed to glow. The song was finished. She could hear it clearly now. It was complete. A part of her desperately wanted to see it performed someday. Would this really be okay? But if she stayed any longer and someone arrived, everything would be exposed. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the Crystal Palace, someone was walking through the halls late at night. It had been a while since he had visited this area. Even at such a late hour, it sounded as though someone was still practicing. Perhaps he should take a quick look. If it was a peaceful melody, it might even help with his sleeplessness. Still, it was very late, so perhaps it could not be helped. Then suddenly he stopped. It was the sound of a piano. What a warm and relaxing song. It felt as though his heart was slowly being healed with every note. Listening more carefully, he realized that it sounded like a piano arrangement of the unfinished orchestral symphony. Whoever was playing it had to be an incredibly talented virtuoso. He could hardly believe that someone with this level of skill existed within the court orchestra. As the melody continued, memories began surfacing. It reminded him of his mother and his sister. Long ago, he had often fallen asleep while listening to the melodies they played within the Crystal Palace, only to get scolded afterward for doing so. The music carried the same warmth and comfort he remembered from those days. This music, how on earth was this possible? Who was playing? Surely he could not have overlooked someone this talented. As he hurried through the halls trying to find the source of the melody, he became frustrated. Where was the entrance? Had he gotten lost again? Finally, as he entered one of the rooms, he suddenly crashed into someone. Both of them stumbled back in surprise. "Ah, my apologies. I wasn't looking where I was going. Are you all right?" he asked. Mary quickly thanked him as she stood up. As she looked at him, she could not help but think that he was incredibly handsome. Who could he be at this hour? Judging from the civilian clothes he was wearing, he did not seem to be a noble. Perhaps he was an attendant. The man then asked her which direction led to the orchestra practice room. Mary pointed the way and told him where it was located. Then he asked if anyone had passed through the area. Mary quickly replied that there had been nothing of that sort. The mysterious pianist had probably left through a different route. Hearing that, he sighed. There was nothing more he could do for now. The only option left was to call the music director the following day and investigate. There were very few musicians within the royal palace who possessed such extraordinary musical ability, so finding them should not be difficult. He also made a mental note to question the girl he had bumped into. Since she had been near the Crystal Palace, she must have heard the performance and perhaps even seen who was responsible. The next morning, Mary was suddenly awakened by frantic knocking on her door. "Mary! Mary! Are you in there?" Startled awake, she quickly replied that she was inside and asked what had happened. She was immediately informed that the Imperial Band's royal maestro, Bahan himself, had summoned her to the Crystal Palace. Right now, Mary was shocked. Not the vice conductor, not the concertmaster, the maestro himself? As she hurried over, panic began filling her mind. Of course it was not the vice conductor or the concertmaster. How could she possibly have written something like that? As she arrived, she noticed everyone gathered around a particular music sheet. Her music sheet, the one she had secretly left behind. It was because of the motif sheet she had written that all this commotion was happening. As soon as she entered, Bahan greeted her and apologized for calling her so early in the morning, but he explained that there was something extremely important he needed to ask her. Mary nervously reminded herself to stay calm. She knew absolutely nothing. Yesterday evening, who was the last person to leave? Bahan asked. Mary admitted that it had been her. While nervously fidgeting, she tried her best to appear natural. Bahan then showed her the music sheet and asked whether she knew anything about it. Mary immediately claimed that it was her first time seeing it. He then asked if she had seen anyone after she left. Mary replied that she had not and asked why he wanted to know. Bahan suddenly became even more excited. Then who in the world left this music sheet behind? Look at this. I don't know who it was, but they left behind a miraculous musical manuscript. His voice grew louder with every word. He explained that he absolutely had to find the person responsible. The composition was extraordinary. In his eyes, he could not even compare himself to the creator. Whoever wrote it was undoubtedly a person of distinction. When he finally met them, he intended to ask them to teach him. Hearing such praise directed toward her own work made Mary feel even more nervous. She desperately tried to maintain a calm expression. Suddenly another voice interrupted from behind. My, who is this concertmaster making such a commotion? Everyone turned around. Another man had entered the room. He then asked why a knight of the royal prince's guard was present there as well. Before anyone could react, Bahan introduced himself as the band's concertmaster. The newcomer then calmly announced that the crown prince was waiting and ordered everyone to follow him immediately. Just as the group began moving, the man suddenly stopped and looked directly at Mary. "You're that girl. You should come along as well." The moment she heard those words, Mary froze in shock. Why had the crown prince called for her? The moment Mary was summoned, countless thoughts rushed through her mind. Had he found her out? No. She quickly told herself not to overthink things. She could not think of a single reason why he would suspect her true identity. If she had really been discovered, they would not be politely escorting her to meet him. She would have been dragged to prison immediately, so she needed to stay calm. There was no reason to be nervous. Soon, they arrived at their destination and were informed that His Highness was waiting for them, so they should mind their manners. Even Chancellor Duke Orlan was present. As both Mary and Bahan entered, they respectfully greeted Crown Prince Rael with a bow. Stay calm, Mary reminded herself. Right now, she was not the princess of the Cloven Kingdom. She was only a clueless maid. The crown prince turned his attention toward Bahan and asked if he was the Imperial Band's concertmaster. Bahan immediately confirmed it. Rael thanked him for his efforts and explained that he had called him there because there was something he needed to verify. Suddenly, Rael revealed a familiar piece of music. It was the country, Bahan's unfinished symphony. Bahan's eyes widened in shock. How did His Highness know about this symphony? More importantly, the crown prince was playing the unfinished ending while perfectly following the melody written on the sheets that had been discovered that morning. The similarity was exact. Could it really be? Bahan knew that performing beyond that point was nearly impossible with his current skill level. Only a truly gifted virtuoso could manage music of such difficulty. Rael then asked whether he recognized the piece. Bahan immediately replied that he did. The crown prince then asked whose composition it was. Bahan explained that it was originally his own work, but due to his shortcomings, he had never been able to complete it. However, that very morning, he had found several practice sheets left behind by an anonymous individual. The melody and motifs written on those pages were identical to what the crown prince had just played. Hesitantly, Bahan wondered if perhaps the crown prince himself had written them. Rail immediately denied it. He explained that he had only heard the melody once before. He then asked whether one of the imperial band members could have composed it. Bahan replied that he had already questioned everyone. None of them knew anything about it. More importantly, no one within the imperial band, including himself, possessed the ability to compose such an outstanding piece. Rail quietly listened before suggesting that there was still a slight possibility that one of the musicians had left it behind. He ordered Bahan to investigate the imperial band once more. Bahan respectfully accepted the command. Meanwhile, Mary stood silently, her heart racing. How did the crown prince know about the piece she had completed? She was certain she had checked the area thoroughly before writing it. Of all people, why did it have to be discovered by the Blood Prince himself? The situation felt unbelievably strange. Duke Orlan agreed. The circumstances were remarkably similar to the incident involving the sculpture. It almost seemed as though an angel descended from heaven, left behind a miraculous gift, and then vanished without a trace. It was as if an angel came and left once again. Rail admitted that the situation was indeed strange. The question was, who on earth could be responsible? Then his attention shifted toward Mary. He asked who she was. Mary introduced herself and quietly stated that her name was Mary. Rail nodded before explaining that he had heard she was the last person working in the Crystal Palace the previous night. Since she had overheard the discussion regarding the mysterious musician, he wanted to know whether she had seen anyone. Mary's entire body felt tense. She told herself that she could do this. She only needed to stay calm. While trembling slightly, she explained that after cleaning the practice room, she did hear music, but she had not seen anyone enter or leave. By the time she finished her duties, there was no one there. Rail studied her carefully before replying that he understood. Then he looked directly into her eyes. The moment their gazes met, Mary felt chills run down her spine. Those cold blue eyes carried an overwhelming pressure. Yet strangely enough, she felt as though she had seen them somewhere before. The feeling was unsettling. After a brief silence, Rail told her that she could leave and return to her duties. Relief immediately washed over her. She had survived. However, just as she was about to leave, Rail suddenly stopped her. "Before you go, try playing this piano." Mary's heart nearly stopped. What should she do? The piano? Rail confirmed that he wanted her to play. Panic filled her mind. Had he somehow figured it out? Desperately trying to avoid suspicion, Mary explained that she was inexperienced as a piano player and worried that she would only hurt his ears if she played. Rail replied that he did not mind and instructed her to play without concern. Mary sat down at the piano while her thoughts spiraled out of control. Should she intentionally play badly? No, that might make him suspicious. But if she played properly, that could be even worse. What should she do? What should she do? Her hands trembled as they rested on the keys. Finally, she began to play. After only a short moment, Rail abruptly stopped her and announced that it was enough. His expression appeared strangely troubled. He then dismissed her and ordered her to return to work. Mary blinked in confusion before quickly agreeing and leaving the room. Once she was gone, Rail remained deep in thought. Something about the situation felt strange. Duke Orlan asked what exactly was bothering him. The maid who had just left. Rail admitted that there was something unusual about her. Orlan pointed out that she seemed completely ordinary. Was there something specific that had stood out? Rail replied that it was her eyes. They had been clear and unwavering, almost as if she was not afraid to face him directly. How could a mere maid possess eyes like that? No matter how much he thought about it, he could not figure it out. Perhaps it was simply his imagination. Then another possibility crossed his mind. Could that maid have been the one playing the piano? Orlan asked why Rail had suddenly requested that she play. After thinking for a moment, Rail dismissed the idea. It could not have been her. Even so, both the sculptor and the mysterious musician remained complete mysteries. Orlan swore upon his name that he would uncover their identities. Rail entrusted the matter to him. Yet even as the discussion ended, one thought remained in his mind. Mary, was it? Perhaps he should keep an eye on her for a little while longer. Phew! Mary let out a sigh of relief. After the incident with Mr. Bahan, she had definitely learned her lesson. She still remembered how determined he had looked when he declared that he would find the mysterious musician and become their student. He was usually so calm and docile, but after discovering those music sheets, he had become a completely different person. Fortunately, Mary finally had the chance to leave the Crystal Palace behind. Although she had been quite shocked when the Crown Prince personally called for her, everything seemed to have been resolved without any major problems. At least that was what she hoped. This time, she had been assigned to the Swan Garden, a place that had been neglected for years. Since almost nobody visited the garden anymore, there would probably not be anyone around. Then she suddenly remembered something the head maid had said. Recently, there had been rumors about a white-haired ghost appearing around the Swan Garden. However, She had been told not to pay attention to such nonsense. Even so, as Mary made her way toward the garden, she could not help shivering slightly. She would be okay, right? The atmosphere already felt rather eerie. Surely the ghost would not suddenly appear in front of her. As she entered the garden and looked around, she tried to calm herself down. Of course not. There was no such thing as ghosts. Instead of thinking about scary stories, she should focus on working hard. That was much more important. However, while she was working, she suddenly heard something. What? What was that? What was that sound just now? Mary immediately froze. Her imagination began running wild. Don't tell me there really is a ghost here? According to the rumors, a white-haired ghost appeared during the day around Swan Garden, while a golden-haired ghost appeared at night. Perhaps she should just leave for now. No, wait. A ghost would not appear in broad daylight. That made no sense. Besides, she reminded herself that nothing could possibly be scarier than Head Maid Susan or Crown Prince Rail. Gathering her courage, Mary decided to investigate. Slowly pushing through the bushes, she quietly prayed for her mother to watch over her. Then suddenly she found the source of the noise. A handsome young man stood there. The man immediately apologized, saying that it seemed he had disturbed her while she was working. Mary quickly shook her head and replied that she should be the one apologizing for disturbing his training. She knew it. There was no ghost after all. Mary introduced herself, and as she looked at the man, she could not help staring for a moment. He was incredibly handsome. How could anyone mistake someone as handsome for a ghost? The man explained that he was one of the Imperial bodyguards and introduced himself as Kyle. An Imperial bodyguard? Mary was surprised. The palace currently had two knightly orders, the Royal Guard and the Imperial Bodyguards. Among them, the Imperial Bodyguards represented the Empire's greatest military force and pledged their loyalty only to Emperor Thorn II himself. It was also common knowledge that members of the Imperial Bodyguards always wore their uniforms. It was practically unheard of to see one without it. Because of that, Mary assumed that Kyle must be a squire rather than a full knight. Curious, she politely asked why he was in the garden. Kyle explained that he had been practicing his swordsmanship and needed a quiet place to think. He then assured Mary that he would leave her to her work and continue his training elsewhere in the garden. Mary encouraged him to do his best. As she watched him leave, she found herself wondering what was troubling him. He looked like someone carrying many worries on his shoulders. She might not know much about swordsmanship, but it was hard to believe that someone who already appeared so skilled still needed to train so diligently. Then another thought crossed her mind. If Kyle was the rumored white-haired ghost, then who exactly was the golden-haired ghost people spoke about at night? As the day went on, Kyle unexpectedly began helping her with the work. While the two of them trimmed bushes and cleaned the neglected garden together, Mary thanked him, pointing out that he must be very busy. Kyle replied that he did not mind. He had plenty of free time. Besides, he could not simply stand by and watch while she worked so diligently on her own. Hearing that made Mary smile. This unbelievably handsome man was also kind and considerate. As the work continued, the two managed to accomplish much more than she had expected. Eventually, the sun began to set. Kyle informed Mary that he would be leaving and apologized for not being more helpful. Since it was getting dark, he advised her to take care on her way back. Mary thanked him and wished him a safe journey as well. Once he was gone, the garden felt even drearier than before. The darkness seemed to make everything feel larger and more mysterious. Since she wanted to finish her assignment on time, Mary decided she would need to continue working into the evening as well. Still, she reminded herself that she should head back before it became too late. As she walked through the garden, she came across a memorial and remembered the story connected to the place. This had once been the garden of the seventh princess. Unlike many nobles, the seventh princess had earned a good reputation because of her compassion and kindness. Unfortunately, after becoming caught in the struggle for the throne, she suffered a tragic death. According to the stories, the Swan Garden had been abandoned after the princess died from poisoning. By all accounts, she had been a remarkably kind person. Feeling sympathy for the late princess, Mary quietly approached her resting place. However, while she was standing there, a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "What are you doing here?" Mary jumped in surprise. The sudden voice nearly scared her half to death. Turning around, she immediately recognized the man standing there. Wasn't he the same person she had seen at the Crystal Palace? Why was he here at the Swan Garden? The man repeated his question, asking what she was doing there. Mary quickly explained that she was cleaning the Swan Garden in preparation for the upcoming festival. After hearing her answer, the man simply replied that he understood. Then he unexpectedly addressed her by name. Mary was startled. Had she told him her name before? The man then pointed toward a nearby pavilion and asked whether she had been the one taking care of it. Mary answered that she had and asked why he wanted to know. However, instead of explaining himself, the man simply turned around and walked away. Mary blinked in confusion. What? Why did he just leave? Watching him disappear into the darkness, she finally realized something. The rumors about the golden-haired ghost were probably referring to him. In the end, both the white-haired ghost and the golden-haired ghost had turned out to be unbelievably handsome men rather than spirits. That alone made her feel much better. More importantly, there were no real ghosts haunting the Swan Garden after all. As for those mysterious men, she probably would not run into them again. After all, she would not be working in the Swan Garden for much longer. The next day, then the day after that, and then the day after that as well. Mary could not help but wonder what on earth was going on. Sir Kyle was always there, and so was that nameless golden-haired man. Swan Garden had been neglected for years. There was nothing particularly worth seeing there, and it was located in such a remote corner of the palace that almost nobody ever visited. There were even dedicated training grounds for the imperial bodyguards, so why did Sir Kyle keep going out of his way to come here? And why would those two men repeatedly travel all the way to Swan Garden? Mary barely knew either of them, so she felt it was probably rude to be so curious about their affairs. Even so, she could not stop wondering. No, she quickly told herself. She needed to stop thinking about it. She still had a mountain of work waiting for her. It would be much better to focus on work instead. Besides, Sir Kyle had been kind enough to help her with the groundskeeping these past few days. The least she could do was pretend not to notice anything strange. Then another thought suddenly crossed her mind. That dream. She remembered it clearly. In the dream, a chef had kindly allowed her to use the kitchen. She had thanked him and promised that she would definitely repay him for the favor. The chef had simply laughed and replied that she had been working hard in the kitchen, so the least he could do was let her use it. In return, all he asked was that she clean up afterward. The man from her dream was Lily Palace's master chef Peter. Back in reality, Peter asked Mary whether there was anything she needed help with. Since he did not have much to do at the moment, he offered to lend her a hand. Mary politely declined, saying she would be fine and believed she could manage on her own. Shortbread cookies, dacoits, and cannoli should be enough, she thought. All right, let's begin. Etoiles, amour. At first, Mary had not thought much about the dream, but now she felt there had been a reason for it. Whenever she felt sad as a child, her mother would make delicious cookies for her. Those memories always brought her comfort. Of course, Kyle and the mysterious golden-haired man probably had their own reasons for coming to the garden, and she did not want to pry into their personal lives. However, if she made cookies to cheer them up, surely that would be harmless. Delicious food always lifted a person's spirits. She sincerely hoped they would turn out well. Later, after finishing the baking, she presented the cookies to Kyle. He looked surprised and asked what they were. Mary explained that they were simply something she had made to thank him for all the help he had given her. Kyle was genuinely impressed that she had made them herself. They looked delicious. Mary modestly replied that they were actually quite simple to make. She then mentioned that today was her final day working at Swan Garden. Kyle seemed surprised by the news and repeated her words. Today was her last day? Mary nodded and explained that she would be assigned somewhere else after today. Kyle quietly replied that he understood. As he looked at the neatly prepared cookies, he found himself wondering when she had managed to make them. She always worked late into the evening, yet somehow she still found the time to bake. You are very considerate, Mary, he told her. You are very cute as well. The unexpected compliment immediately caught her off guard. Embarrassed, she asked him not to tease her. Kyle replied that he was not teasing her at all. He was being completely serious. He then thanked her sincerely for the gift, even though he felt he had done nothing to deserve such kindness. In truth, he admitted that he had been occupied with many thoughts lately. Taking a bite, he immediately praised the cookies. They were delicious. Hearing that made Mary smile with relief. She confessed that she had been worried they would not turn out well. Then, after gathering her courage, she carefully told him something she had wanted to say for a while. She admitted that she might be overstepping her boundaries, but he often seemed troubled by something. Perhaps she was mistaken, but if he truly was struggling, she hoped things would get better soon. She also hoped he would take her words to heart. If her concerns seemed too forward, then she apologized in advance. Kyle was touched by her sincerity and assured her that he took no offense at all. On the contrary, he thanked her and promised that he would wholeheartedly enjoy the cookies. Later, Mary encountered the mysterious golden-haired man as well. Feeling awkward, she handed him a separate batch of cookies. The man looked down at them and asked what they were. Mary nervously explained that she had made them for him. If they did not suit his taste, he did not need to accept them. The man studied the cookies for a moment before replying that she must have worked very hard to make them. He assured her that he would enjoy them. Then he quietly muttered something about coincidence. Confused, Mary asked what he meant. The man simply shook his head and said it was nothing. He then thanked her for all the hard work she had put into maintaining the garden. Mary was left puzzled. Why was he thanking her? She could not understand it. After she left, the man continued thinking about her. Mary had been nearby during both the sculpture incident and the musician incident. It was strange how often their paths seemed to cross. The coincidence was becoming difficult to ignore. As he tasted the cookies, he paused. They were delicious. For some reason, the flavor reminded him of someone. It reminded him of the princess. Meanwhile, elsewhere, another meeting was taking place. It had been quite some time since they last met. A man respectfully greeted a noble and asked whether he had been well. Then his identity was finally revealed. He was Kilhan de Seaton, the head knight of the imperial bodyguards. Bowing respectfully, he introduced himself and offered his greetings to His Imperial Highness, Crown Prince Rael. Recently, Crown Prince Rael had been spending a considerable amount of time in the Swan Garden. Seeing this, he questioned Kyle and asked what reason an incompetent guard dog like him had for lingering around the area. Kyle immediately apologized sincerely for what had happened in the past. However, Rael told him to forget it. His departed sister would never have wanted him to place the blame for that incident on Kyle. After a brief silence, Rael asked whether Kyle had given any thought to the proposal he had made. He wanted an answer. He had already given Kyle more than enough time to consider it carefully. Kyle lowered his head and apologized, but he could not accept the Crown Prince's proposal. Rael stared at him coldly and asked if that was truly his final answer. Then he repeated the question once more, asking whether that was truly his final answer. Kilhan. Regretfully, Kyle replied that it was. Hearing this answer, Rael let out a disappointed sigh. Kyle. No, Kilhan. There was a time when he considered him his greatest friend. Did Kyle truly believe that Emperor Thorn II would ever wake up again? Kyle answered honestly. No, he did not believe the Emperor would recover. The possibility was extremely unlikely. Rael immediately questioned him. Then why? Why would Kyle continue wasting away as an Imperial bodyguard serving a master who remained unconscious? Why continue doing such a thing? Kyle's answer was simple. Because it was his duty. His duty? Rael could hardly believe what he was hearing. Was Kyle truly willing to continue blindly serving the Emperor simply to uphold the traditions of the Seaton clan? Was he really willing to oppose him for the sake of a master who was not even conscious? All because the Emperor had never formally acknowledged Rael as his heir? The Seaton clan was no ordinary noble family. Their military corps alone commanded over 30,000 soldiers. Excluding the Emperor himself, the most powerful military authority in the Empire belonged to the Seaton clan. For generations, they had served the Empire since its very foundation. Only the Emperor himself possessed the authority to appoint an heir within the clan. The man standing at the center of that powerful family was none other than the ruler of the Empire's northwestern territories and the head knight of the Imperial bodyguards, Marquis Kilhan de Seaton. Rael looked at him with disappointment. So that was how the Seaton clan viewed him. In their eyes, he was nothing more than a usurper to the throne. At least now he knew exactly where Kyle stood. Kyle apologized once again, but before the conversation ended, Rael said there was one final thing he wanted to say. Reaching down, he casually grabbed a flower growing nearby. Then he asked Kyle whether he had ever considered why he approached him with that proposal in the first place. Did Kyle think it was because he needed the strength of the Seaton clan? The answer was no. As Rael slowly crushed the flower in his hand, he explained that he was perfectly capable of claiming the Emperor's crown and throne on his own. He did not need anyone's help to achieve that. Despite this, there had been a reason he came to Kyle personally. It was because he did not want things to end with him taking the life of a friend with his own hands. The words hung heavily in the air. Rael then asked him directly, did Kyle truly believe he would be unable to kill him? Kyle calmly replied that if His Highness wished it, then it would happen. Rael looked at him for a long moment before asking one final time, would Marquis Kilhan accept his proposal? Once again, Kyle lowered his head and offered his sincerest apologies. However, his answer remained unchanged. He would have to decline. As the flower crumbled in Rael's hand, the Crown Prince's expression hardened. So be it. If that was Kyle's decision, then he could continue blindly following the traditions of his clan. With those final words, Rael turned around and began walking away. As Kyle watched him leave, memories resurfaced in his mind. He remembered the funeral of the princess. He remembered the sorrow and the regrets that still lingered to this day. Then another memory followed. He recalled Mary's gentle words from the Swan Garden. She had told him that she might not know what he was struggling with, but she hoped he would not carry the burden alone and that he would take her words to heart. As those memories echoed within him, Kyle remained standing silently, watching the Crown Prince disappear into the distance. It had been so long since the last festival. The citizens were excited, saying that they could finally relax and enjoy life for a little while. Now that Cloven was at peace, they could finally breathe again. Some people even talked about the food rations that would be distributed once the festival began. Many were relieved to see that Crown Prince Rael was taking care of the people. Meanwhile, within the palace, reports continued to arrive regarding the preparation. The festival preparations were proceeding smoothly. Rael instructed them to ensure that everything went well since it had been many years since the last festival. The citizens had struggled under heavy taxation for a long time, so he suggested reducing their taxes for the coming fiscal year. His subordinates immediately agreed and promised to make the necessary arrangements. Then another matter was brought to his attention. There was an unexpected surprise. The Western Empire was sending a celebratory delegation. Rael was visibly surprised. He had not expected them to send a delegation since it had been a long time since they had done such a thing. Considering the relationship between the two nations, the news was suspicious. The Western Empire had always acted as a rival. They constantly provoked the Empire and still refused to recognize Cloven as officially conquered territory. So why were they suddenly sending a delegation now? Were they trying to expose his weaknesses? If not, perhaps it had something to do with the rumors that the Western Empire was searching for Princess Marina, the last surviving member of the Cloven royal family. If they found her first, the situation could become extremely troublesome. They could potentially claim the right to rule Cloven through her. The thought unsettled Rael. What exactly were they plotting? He immediately asked how many people were in the delegation. The answer shocked him. There would be around 200 people. 200? Not only that, but most of them were knights. Rael immediately wondered whether they were planning some kind of military demonstration. His subordinates assured him that if they acted suspiciously, they could be dealt with immediately. Even if there were 200 of them, suppressing them would not be difficult. In fact, one of the officials admitted that he almost hoped they would attempt something. It would finally provide an excuse to teach those Western scoundrels a lesson. However, further reports suggested that most of those knights were serving as escorts. Escorts? Then who exactly were they escorting? That part remained unknown. According to the reports from the border guards, they seemed to be protecting a highly important individual. Count Schober was already leading the delegation, so it appeared there was another important figure accompanying him. With such a large escort force, it almost looked as though they were protecting royalty. Could a member of the Western Imperial family be joining the delegation as well? Rael ordered everyone to continue monitoring the situation closely. He then asked when the welcoming banquet would be held. The answer was on the day of the festival, 3 days from now. The delegation would arrive the day before. Rael nodded and asked where the banquet would take place. He was informed that it would be held at the Lily Palace. The Lily Palace? For some reason, hearing those words caused him to pause. When asked if something was wrong, he dismissed the concern and said it was nothing they needed to worry about. Yet for some reason, the image of a certain maid suddenly entered his mind. Mary. Meanwhile, Mary had been called by head chef Peter. He instructed her to hold the lamp tightly as they descended underground. Mary agreed and carefully followed him down. The deeper they went, the colder it became. She commented on the chill, and Peter explained that the underground cellar was intentionally kept cold. In such an environment, meat would not spoil easily and could develop a richer flavor as it aged. Mary listened with interest. Peter then thanked her in advance for helping with the banquet preparation. Knowing she would be assisting them made him feel more relaxed. He admitted that he had been extremely anxious. The banquet would host some of the highest-ranking nobles in the empire, and he also needed to meet the crown prince's expectation. On top of that, the Western Empire's delegation would be attending. It was a tremendous amount of pressure. Hearing this reminded Mary that the crown prince himself would also attend the banquet. Still, she reassured herself that she would only be responsible for washing dishes. She probably would not run into him. As she shivered from the cold, she told Peter not to worry too much. In her opinion, he possessed the greatest culinary skills in the entire kingdom. Peter laughed and thanked her. Even if he was not the absolute greatest chef in the nation, he admitted that he was certainly among the best. The banquet's grand centerpiece would be veal steak. They had prepared only the highest quality cuts and allowed them to mature for half a month. However, Peter had become concerned. The recent rain had increased the humidity inside the cellar. He feared it might affect the meat, which was why he had come to inspect it. Mary asked whether that was a problem. Peter explained that when the air became humid, bacteria multiplied much faster. That increased the risk of spoilage. If certain cuts became contaminated, they would have no choice but to throw them away. Looking around, he admitted that the situation seemed worse than it had the previous day. Since the banquet was only 2 days away, losing the meat would be disastrous. They would need to return tomorrow and check again. The following day, Peter's fears became reality. As soon as he entered the cellar, he let out a heavy sigh. This was a serious problem. He had hoped the meat would remain fresh for just one more day until the banquet. Yet somehow, things had deteriorated dramatically overnight. Mary was shocked. How could it change so much in a single day? Peter explained that the increased humidity likely caused the bacteria to spread rapidly. Soon, other staff members arrived and demanded an explanation. Were they really saying that all the meat had spoiled? How had they stored it to allow this to happen? Peter immediately took responsibility and apologized. He explained that the rain had caused the humidity to rise unexpectedly. However, the others argued that no matter the weather, it was his responsibility to prevent something like this. What were they supposed to do now? Were they really going to host the banquet without high-quality meat? Peter quickly explained that they still had some inventory left and should be able to manage. However, the air remained humid. If additional meat spoiled, they would need to acquire supplementary supplies. One of the nobles immediately rejected the idea. If there had only been a few guests, perhaps they could substitute the missing meat. But there would be hundreds of guests attending. They could not possibly replace that much meat with equally high-quality cuts at such short notice. Of course, they could attempt to purchase whatever was available, but it was already the eve of the banquet. If they served inferior meat, they would become the laughingstock of high society. The dishes served tomorrow had to be of the highest possible quality. Therefore, Peter was ordered to ensure that no further spoilage occurred and to produce an excellent meal. If any problems arose, he would bear full responsibility. Peter promised that he would monitor the meat closely and do everything in his power. Later that evening, Mary returned to her room, unable to stop thinking about the situation. As time passed, the bacteria would only continue spreading. Was there any way to stop the meat from spoiling? There had to be. She desperately wanted to help head chef Peter. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she fell asleep at her desk. Suddenly, she found herself somewhere completely different. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment we have all been waiting for. Finally, it is time to choose the Grand Beef Master. Mary looked around in confusion. What was this? Why was she suddenly watching a food competition? Had she already fallen asleep? The first dish was announced as Joseph's filet mignon. The judges explained that the dish relied not only on cooking technique but also on the quality of the cut itself. Its tender texture was divine. Then came the second dish, which was the complete opposite. The cut used was average quality meat that could be found in an ordinary household. Yet through extraordinary technique, it had been elevated to the level of a premium cut. The texture and flavor were so impressive that the judges could hardly believe the original quality of the meat. This famous dish was called. Before the name could be revealed, the dream suddenly shifted. Back in reality, Peter and the staff were inspecting the meat once again. The cuts had been fine the previous night, yet now they were ruined. The humid air must have caused the bacteria to multiply overnight. They had even drilled ventilation holes in an attempt to prevent this from happening. Someone suggested using aromatic herbs to mask the smell. Another immediately rejected the idea. Spoiled meat was not something that could simply be covered up. These cuts were unusable. Then what were they supposed to do? Peter ordered someone to contact suppliers immediately and acquire new meat for the main dish. However, everyone knew that any replacement would inevitably be lower quality. Peter quietly admitted that this banquet might end up being the last meal he ever cooked in the palace. Hearing those words made Mary's heart sink. If only there was some way she could help. If only she could prevent Crown Prince Rail from punishing head chef Peter. Just as Mary was desperately thinking of a solution, a voice suddenly spoke from behind her. If we make that, is there a problem with the banquet preparations? The familiar voice instantly caused Mary to freeze in shock. We humbly greet the Crown Prince. As everyone immediately lowered their heads and bowed, Crown Prince Rail calmly told them that they could raise their heads. He explained that he had originally considered not coming because he thought his presence might only hinder their work. However, he happened to be passing near the Lily Palace when he overheard that some sort of trouble had arisen. In the end, he was glad that he decided to come. He then asked what the problem was. The staff nervously explained that the meat prepared for the banquet's main dish had spoiled. Head chef Peter immediately stepped forward, trembling with fear as he offered his profound apologies. He admitted that the entire situation was due to his own incompetence. Rail listened quietly before asking if that was truly the case. The banquet's highlight was supposed to be the plat principal, the main course. Since the veal steak could no longer be served, what dish were they planning to present instead? Peter quickly explained that they had already contacted suppliers and were attempting to acquire different meat. Different meat? Rail questioned. Wouldn't the quality of the dish suffer if they used substitutes? Were they seriously suggesting that the main dish of such an important banquet should be made from inferior ingredients? Of course, this would happen right before the Western delegation arrived. Rail admitted that it would have been one thing if ordinary guests were attending, but the thought of the Western nobles talking about this behind his back irritated him greatly. Hearing this only made Peter more terrified. He immediately dropped to his knees and offered his life as punishment. Rail quickly stopped him. There was no point apologizing endlessly when the problem still remained unsolved. Rather than begging for forgiveness, they should focus on finding a solution. He then asked whether there was any other dish they could serve instead. Could a suitable plate principle be created using lower-grade meat? Peter honestly admitted that he knew of no culinary technique capable of transforming poor-quality ingredients into something worthy of a royal banquet. Rael replied that there had to be another beef dish besides steak. Peter agreed that many beef dishes existed, but regardless of preparation methods, steak was generally considered the finest way to highlight the flavor of beef itself. Creating something capable of surpassing steak was extremely difficult. That was why most chefs ultimately produced dishes similar to steak. Rael frowned. This was indeed a difficult situation. At that moment, Mary quietly stood nearby listening to the entire discussion. A method to create a high-quality dish from low-grade meat. The dream she experienced the previous night immediately came to mind. If they made the dish she saw in her dream, head chef Peter would surely agree that it was their best option. However, how was she supposed to suggest it? Even the crown prince himself was present. Then suddenly, as she looked up, her eyes met Rael's. Why? Why had their eyes met at that exact moment? Rael immediately noticed her and asked who she was. Mary quickly introduced herself as Maid Mary. Rael remembered her. The taste of the cookies she baked had been quite memorable. Still, cookies and banquet dishes were entirely different matters. He could not tell whether her cooking abilities extended beyond baking. Then he asked her directly if she knew of any dishes that could elevate low-quality meat into a suitable plate principle. Before Mary could respond, Peter quickly interrupted. Your Highness, she is merely a palace maid. Her culinary knowledge is likely limited. However, Rael stopped him before he could continue. He turned back to Mary and repeated the question. Did she know of any method capable of turning low-quality meat into a presentable main dish? Mary hesitated. The plate principle. The banquet's main course. Traditionally, it referred to a large serving of meat. Most often, it was a grilled beef steak. However, there was no rule stating that meat had to be cooked directly over fire. The problem was that very few dishes could rival steak as the centerpiece of an entire banquet. The dish she had seen in her dream used inexpensive meat, yet somehow produced a flavor that could rival even the finest steak. But was it really okay for her to speak up? What would happen if she did? Why had the crown prince chosen to ask her specifically? If she pretended not to know anything, perhaps he would finally stop paying attention to her. Yet as she looked around at the worried faces surrounding her, she found herself unable to remain silent. Finally, she spoke. There was one dish she knew of. Immediately, Rael asked what it was. Mary explained that her mother used to make it often. Even when using the lowest quality cuts of meat, the dish always came out tender and delicious. It was not a high-quality steak, but it possessed its own unique flavor and appeal. Since it was not a dish commonly eaten by nobles, it might even attract the interest of guests who were accustomed to traditional steaks. The process required grinding the meat. However, Mary admitted that she had never actually made it herself, so she could not guarantee the results. Rael immediately gave his answer. Then make it. He would personally taste the dish and decide for himself. Hearing that made Mary nervous. Among the palace maids, there were many who could cook well. Even if she turned out to be good at cooking, she should not draw too much attention to herself. Yet strangely enough, despite making the dish for the first time, she did not feel nervous. She could do this. As she began slicing onions and preparing ingredients, her hands moved naturally as though guided by someone else's experience. Meanwhile, elsewhere, the Western delegation had already begun gathering. Nobles exchanged greetings and discussed the upcoming banquet. One noble asked whether Pease had been treating another well. The other replied that he had experienced no problems and remarked that the same seemed true for his companion. As they waited, someone pointed out that the crown prince had yet to arrive. Another explained that he was expected to appear before the banquet officially began. Soon the conversation shifted toward politics. Rumors regarding a new emperor for the Eastern Empire had spread widely. Did they mean the crown prince? Some referred to him as the blood monarch, though many dismissed such stories as exaggerated. Compared to their own King Jonas III, they viewed him as nothing more than a callow youth. Another noble casually mentioned hearing rumors that the meat prepared for this year's banquet had spoiled due to poor storage. He wondered what they would be served now. Someone else laughed and remarked that no matter how barbaric the Eastern Empire might be, surely they would not dare serve rotten meat to foreign dignitaries. Just then, Crown Prince Rael finally arrived. Addressing the assembled guests, he thanked them all for making the long journey. Although the dishes prepared for them were humble, he sincerely hoped they would enjoy the meal. The Western nobles quietly observed the plates placed before them. These Eastern peasants were so predictable, some thought. It was obvious that they had acquired lower quality meat at the last moment and attempted to disguise it as something respectable. Still, they decided to taste it before passing judgment. As they cut into the dish and took their first bite, silence immediately filled the room. The dishes were acceptable overall. As the guests continued eating, many admitted that they had not expected this kind of flavor from the Eastern Empire. The banquet had been impressive so far, but everyone knew that the true highlight was still to come. The Platte Principle. Soon, the main dish was presented before the guests. The attendants proudly announced that this exquisite meat dish had been specially prepared by the talented chefs of the Eastern Empire and that it would surely enthrall their taste buds. Finally, the moment had arrived. The Western nobles eagerly examined the dish before them. However, the moment they looked down at their plates, several of them frowned. Ground meat? The audacity to serve something so simple at a royal banquet. As expected of peasants, some thought. Yet despite their criticism, they still took a bite. The moment they did, their expressions completely changed. A simple dish? The flavor was unlike anything they had expected. The taste of Salisbury steak could vary greatly depending on the skill of the cook, and the ratio of ingredients blended together was critical. Many chefs believed that a first-class dish was one that best showcased the natural flavors of high-quality ingredients. By preserving the succulence of the meat, carefully cooking it, and ensuring its texture and flavor remained intact, they believed perfection could be achieved. That belief was not wrong. However, there was another philosophy as well. Perhaps a truly first-class dish was one that could bring joy to anyone who tasted it, using ingredients that were readily available to ordinary people. Was that not the true hallmark of a great dish? As the nobles continued eating, they could hardly believe what they were tasting. What was this? How had they managed to bring out such flavor? Murmurs quickly spread throughout the hall. For many of them, it was their first time encountering a dish like this. Some openly praised it, saying that although it tasted different from roasted steak, it was equally impressive in its own way. Grinding the beef had not lowered the quality of the dish at all. If anything, it had made the meat even more tender. Others declared the dish magnificent. No one would ever guess that such tender and flavorful beef had been created from lower-grade cuts of meat. Prepared incorrectly, the dish could easily have become bland, but the careful addition of wine enhanced the beef flavor perfectly. Before long, the nobles could not stop praising it. Eventually, one of the guests asked Crown Prince Rael what this remarkable dish was called. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the kitchen, Mary was being informed that the banquet guests were thoroughly enjoying the meal. Hearing that brought her immense relief. Just then, Rael's earlier words echoed in her mind. He had told her that if the dish was well received, he would reward her for her efforts. Mary immediately insisted that there was no need for any reward. Simply knowing that she had been able to serve something beneficial to His Highness and to the Empire was enough for her. However, Rael had responded that as a ruler, he could not simply ignore someone who had rendered such service to the nation. He informed her that he would summon her once the banquet concluded. The memory made Mary nervous all over again. Back in the banquet hall, Rael finally answered the guest's question. The dish was called Salisbury steak. It was also known as Hamburg steak. Looking around the hall, he could see that nearly every guest had enjoyed it. The reaction was even better than expected. For a brief moment, he even considered assigning Mary to work permanently in the Lion Palace. Meanwhile, the Western delegation continued discussing the meal among themselves. One noble admitted that he had been surprised to see such a dish served as the Platte Principle. Another remarked that he had eaten every last bite and that it had been far better than expected. As the conversation continued, one man addressed another as Your Majesty. Immediately, the second man corrected him. It was Your Highness. He had already instructed him to use that title while they were in the Eastern Empire. Had he forgotten? For now, he was merely a member of the delegation. The noble immediately apologized, explaining that it was difficult to address him so casually. The man frowned and asked whether he intended to disobey his orders. The man in question was Johannes III. At only 15 years old, he had ascended the throne of the Western Empire. In the 10 years since, he had become famous for bringing peace and stability to a once chaotic nation. Handsome, resourceful, intelligent, and kind, he was widely regarded as the ideal monarch. However, like every person, he still possessed flaws. His greatest flaw was his tendency to do reckless things despite knowing the risks. Looking at him now, his attendants could only sigh. They should have expected something like this when he insisted on personally visiting the Eastern Empire. The entire situation was dangerous. They argued that they should return to the Western Empire while they still had the opportunity. Johannes asked what exactly was so dangerous. His attendants reminded him that even disguised, there was always a chance his identity would be exposed. Johannes simply shrugged. It was only a matter of time before someone figured it out. The Easterners would have to be blind not to notice eventually. His attendants became even more worried. They had no idea how Crown Prince Rael would react if he discovered that the king of the Western Empire was secretly attending the delegation in disguise. Johannes dismissed their concerns. They worried too much. Even if the Eastern Empire discovered his identity, they could not act against him without threatening the fragile peace between their nations. His attendants still argued that he had no reason to personally attend this delegation. Johannes smiled and asked if they had forgotten the true purpose of the trip. They had not come merely for a festival. They had come because of Princess Marina, the last surviving royal of Cloven. Rumors claimed that she was hiding somewhere within the Eastern Empire. Johannes wanted to determine whether those rumors were true. In his opinion, the Eastern Empire clearly had not heard the same rumors. If they had, the entire empire would already be in chaos searching for her. One of his attendants then raised another concern. What about his health? They feared he might suffer another attack while away from home. Johannes assured them that he was taking his medicine and that his condition had improved significantly. He had not suffered an attack for nearly half a year. Furthermore, a royal physician was accompanying him in case of emergency. Even so, his attendants remained unconvinced. Johannes finally ended the discussion. Enough of that. He had to see for himself what kind of girl Princess Marina truly was. And if he found her, he intended to bring her to his side. Crash! Medic! Where is the medic? Please wait a moment. Save me! Save me! Cough! Cough! The desperate cries echoed through Mary's dream as chaos unfolded around her. Then, suddenly, the scene disappeared. At the same moment, fireworks exploded across the night sky, signaling the beginning of the festival. While the Empire celebrated, Mary was busy working. Orders were being shouted from every direction. Clean up the trash over there. Don't waste time. Work quickly. Make sure the food for the banquet hall is delivered promptly. As Mary worked, she glanced up at the colorful fireworks illuminating the sky. The sight was beautiful, but for some reason, it did little to ease the uneasiness she felt. Jane approached her and asked whether she had eaten yet. Mary replied that she had not. Jane sighed and admitted that she had not been able to eat anything all day either. She joked that there was probably a mountain of delicious food being served inside the banquet hall right now. Just thinking about it made her jealous. At the very least, she hoped she could sneak a peek before the festival ended. Mary smiled faintly, but her thoughts remained elsewhere. Why had she dreamed of something like that? Every time she had one of those strange dreams, some sort of incident followed shortly afterward. Jane noticed her troubled expression and asked if everything was all right. Mary quickly reassured her that she was fine and told her not to worry. Then she excused herself and returned to work. Soon afterward, another maid handed her a bag of trash and asked her to throw it away. Mary immediately agreed. As she walked outside to dispose of it, she carefully checked the surroundings. That should be everything. Let me see if there is anything left. Since the festival was underway, there probably would not be anyone lurking around, but she still could not help being cautious. Suddenly, another maid hurried over and informed her that head maid Susan was looking for her. Mary quickly replied that she was coming. When she arrived, Susan informed her of something completely unexpected. Starting tomorrow, she would no longer be working at the Lily Palace. Instead, she was to report to Gloria Hall. Gloria Hall? Mary was confused. That was where the banquet was taking place. Did that mean she would be helping clean up after the banquet ended? Or perhaps assisting in the kitchen? Susan immediately corrected her. No, she would actually be attending the banquet itself. Mary was stunned. Attending the banquet? That was work reserved for mid-ranked maids. Mid-ranked maids generally came from noble families or were at least of noble birth. Although lower-ranked maids could eventually earn promotions, it normally took years of service. Why was a low-ranked maid like her suddenly being assigned to such duties? Susan smiled and congratulated her. Effective immediately, Mary had been promoted to a mid-ranked maid. Mary could hardly believe what she was hearing. Later, as she changed into her new uniform, she found herself feeling conflicted. Her previous duties were physically demanding, but she preferred working quietly in the background. Being promoted should have been a good thing, yet she could not bring herself to feel happy about it. Susan admitted that she was surprised as well, but explained that the royal advisors must have given the matter considerable thought before making the decision. Hoping for reassurance, Mary asked whether she would return to the Lily Palace after the festival ended. Susan shook her head. No. Afterward, she would be transferred somewhere else entirely. Mary nervously asked where. The answer nearly made her collapse. The Lion Palace. Anywhere but there. The Lion Palace was where Crown Prince Rail lived. Mary immediately decided that she had to find a way to stop this from happening, no matter what. Who could have possibly promoted her and arranged for her transfer to the Lion Palace? Then she remembered Rail's words. If the dish was received well, he would reward her greatly. This wasn't a reward at all. It felt more like a punishment. For a brief moment, she wondered whether she should never have spoken up about the dish. However, she quickly shook her head. No, that wasn't true. She did not regret helping head chef Peter. She would gladly do it again. Even so, she absolutely had to refuse the transfer to the Lion Palace. Perhaps if she spoke to head maid Susan and explained the situation, something could be changed. Before she could think any further, she was summoned for briefing. A senior maid confirmed her background, noting that she had been born in Cloven and had worked in the Lily Palace for several years. Mary introduced herself politely. The senior maid explained that once the banquet began, her duty would simply be to attend to the guests. Since she had already worked at the palace for 3 years, she was expected to know proper etiquette. Mary confirmed that she did. Satisfied with the answer, the woman decided to keep an eye on her performance throughout the evening. Soon, the banquet officially began. Mary moved through the hall carrying trays and serving drinks. "Here is your cocktail. If you need anything else, please call for me." As she looked around, she became increasingly nervous. There was a noble here, another noble there. Everywhere she looked, there were aristocrats and members of royal families from different nations. Some were foreign dignitaries she had never even heard of before. She desperately hoped there would not be any trouble between the nobles. The atmosphere seemed peaceful enough, but one never knew. Soft piano music filled the grand hall while conversations continued around her. Then Mary suddenly realized something alarming. Why was she standing so close to the crown prince? The moment she noticed, she nearly jumped in surprise. It had to be a coincidence. There was no other explanation. Yet as she glanced up, her eyes met Rael's. Mary immediately looked away. How scary. Why did he keep looking in this direction? Was there something behind her? Perhaps he was looking at someone else. Yes, that had to be it. Deciding not to risk it, Mary began moving toward another area of the hall. However, before she could get far, a familiar voice called out to her. "Mary." The moment she heard her name, she froze in place. "Shall I bring some whiskey?" One of the attendants asked Crown Prince Rael. Rael shook his head and replied that he had already had enough to drink. Hosting 2 full days of festivities had not been easy. Ever since the festival began, he had barely found a moment to rest. The attendant pointed out that the situation was partly his own fault. Events of this scale were usually managed by an empress or a crown princess. If someone stood beside him to help shoulder these responsibilities, he would not be nearly as busy. The conversation naturally shifted toward marriage. The attendant carefully asked when His Highness intended to take a wife. Rael answered that he had no plans yet. The attendant reminded him that the Senate was growing impatient and expected an answer before the festival ended. Rael was already aware of that fact. However, he insisted that he needed to find the best possible candidate for the sake of the empire. As fireworks continued exploding across the night sky and celebrations echoed throughout the capital, Rael found himself distracted. It was a busy evening, yet his thoughts kept wandering elsewhere. She wasn't here. He looked around the festival grounds once more. Why was he acting so strangely today? Was it because he had been drinking earlier? For some reason, he could not stop thinking about her. Later, Rael found himself walking through the garden alone. He decided he would wait a little longer. Yet as the minutes passed, he began questioning his own action. What exactly was he doing out here? Was he seriously searching for someone when he did not even know what he would say if he found her? Perhaps he should simply head back. Just then, he spotted a familiar figure in the distance. Mary had been given another task. Someone handed her a stack of items and told her to throw them away. As she carried them outside, Rael watched from a distance without revealing himself. He could not help noticing how much work she handled every day. What was she? How could someone with such a frail appearance manage so many responsibilities? Then another thought crossed his mind. Come to think of it, he had never properly thanked her for the cookies she gave him. Before he could approach her, another maid called Mary's name and she hurried back inside. Rael remained hidden and silently questioned himself. What was wrong with him today? Meanwhile, conversations continued throughout the banquet. Several nobles were discussing potential candidates for the position of empress. Lady Kazarin and Lady Spina seemed particularly determined to push their own interests. Nearby was Princess Dominin, who had arrived as an envoy. Then Rael's thoughts returned once more to Princess Marina. In many ways, she remained the ideal candidate for empress, yet they still had not found her. Even if he could not reach her immediately, he needed to find her eventually so that he could. His thoughts suddenly stopped. Across the hall, he spotted Mary again. She was busy serving drinks to the guests. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Mary immediately looked away and continued working. Rael watched her move through the crowd. She dashed from one task to another like a squirrel, constantly busy and never standing still. Elsewhere, several nobles were discussing the orchestra performance. In the end, they had never managed to identify the mysterious composer. Maestro Bahan's work was certainly good, but it still could not compare to that masterpiece from before. The composition left behind by the so-called angel remained unforgettable. An angel. Rael found the idea amusing. How could something like that possibly exist in a palace soaked with blood and political schemes? Then, before he realized it, he found himself calling out her name. Mary. Mary immediately approached and bowed respectfully. Greetings, Your Majesty. Rael asked her to bring him a drink. Of course, she replied. What would he like? A short while later, she returned with the strawberry juice he requested. She politely handed it to him and asked whether he needed anything else. Rael looked at her for a moment before answering that he did not. Mary respectfully told him to call for her if he thought of anything and then prepared to leave. Rael hesitated. Was something wrong? Mary asked. Rael quickly replied that it was nothing. As Mary walked away, she quietly sighed in relief. That was scary. The pressure of standing before the crown prince always made her nervous. Before she could relax completely, another servant handed her a freshly prepared refreshment tray and instructed her to tend to the balcony guests. Mary immediately agreed and continued working. While carrying the tray through the crowded hall, she accidentally collided with someone. Oh no! The tray tilted dangerously and several glasses nearly fell. Everything seemed to happen in an instant. Fortunately, the person she crashed into reacted quickly and caught her before she lost her balance completely. Phew! Are you alright? The man asked. Mary immediately began apologizing and offered her deepest apologies for her carelessness. However, the man gently told her to relax. Supporting her carefully, he asked whether she had been hurt anywhere. My lady, are you alright? Hearing those words, Mary finally looked up at the person she had crashed into. The moment she saw his face, she froze. It was Johannes III. As Mary stood there in shock, she quickly apologized and assured him that she was fine. Bowing her head, she said she was sorry for making such a mess. The man replied that it was no trouble at all since he was the one who had rushed out without paying attention to his surroundings. More importantly, he was glad to see that she was unharmed. Besides, he could always change his clothes. Mary immediately offered to bring him a new suit. He thanked her and then asked if she would also mind washing the stained clothes. Mary agreed without hesitation and told him to wait a moment while she took care of it. As she hurried away, she could not help but think that lately, no matter where she went, she kept running into handsome men. Meanwhile, the man watched her leave and found himself thinking that she was a surprisingly lovely maid. However, he quickly pushed those thoughts aside. Now was not the time for such distraction. If his plan was going to succeed, he first needed to find Princess Marina. Unfortunately, that task had proven far more difficult than expected. Every lead had ended in failure. The last maid he investigated had not been the person he was looking for either. He had questioned nearly every maid who had been brought to the royal palace following the fall of the Cloven Kingdom, yet none of them were Marina. What was he doing wrong? He knew for a fact that Princess Marina had entered the palace disguised as a maid. There was absolutely no doubt about it. Yet none of the maids seemed suspicious. At first, he thought that despite how little was known about the so-called faceless saintess, he would still be able to recognize her once he saw her in person. It appeared he had been mistaken. No matter what, if his plan was to succeed, he had to find her by any means necessary. The problem was that he did not have much time left. Then, at the worst possible moment, a sharp pain suddenly shot through his chest. His expression twisted as he grabbed his heart. Of all times for this to happen, he needed to take his medicine quickly. The pain intensified. His breathing became uneven, his vision blurred, and dizziness overwhelmed him. Why wasn't the medicine working? As he struggled to stay conscious, he remembered the physician's warning. If a severe attack occurred, there was a chance the white pills alone would not be enough to calm it down. If that happened, he would need to take the other medicine, the blue pills. The memory echoed through his mind as he collapsed to the floor. If the white pills had no effect, then he would have to take the blue ones. But his body was already failing him. He could barely move. His vision continued fading, and violent coughing overtook him. No, he could not stay here like this. He could not simply lie on the ground and wait to die. Just then, Mary returned carrying the fresh clothes. She apologized for taking so long and handed them over. However, the moment she saw him lying on the floor, her expression changed completely. What happened? Did he have a seizure? She immediately rushed to his side and checked his pulse. It was incredibly weak. He was on the verge of suffering a heart attack. This had to be treated immediately. As she searched desperately for a solution, she noticed the medicine nearby. Medicine to improve blood flow during an attack. But using that now would only make the situation worse. Instead, he needed something else. A blood pressure stimulant. He must have been trying to take these instead. After finding the blue pills, she quickly placed them in his mouth. However, there was another problem. He was unconscious. He could not swallow. Thinking quickly, Mary crushed the pills, mixed them with water, and carefully administered the medicine. Then she immediately checked his condition again. Her heart sank. His pulse had stopped. If only she were better at first aid. If only she had learned more. Then perhaps she could have helped even more people. But she refused to give up. She could still save him. Please, just a little more. Please, I do not want anyone else to die. Desperately, she continued performing emergency treatment. Moments later, he suddenly coughed. Mary froze. Then she realized what had happened. He was alive. Relief instantly flooded her. Thank goodness. She was so relieved she almost cried. Thank you so much for surviving. Sometime later, the man slowly regained consciousness. His attendants, physician, and servants immediately rushed to his side. Your Majesty, have you come to your senses? He weakly replied that it appeared he was still alive. His physician scolded him, reminding him that this was exactly why they had warned him not to leave the palace. It had been far too dangerous. The man admitted that because he had not suffered an attack in nearly half a year, he thought it would be safe. Clearly, he had been wrong. The physician explained that the attacks may have returned because his dosage had been lowered. To prevent another incident, the dosage would need to be increased back to its original amount. The man agreed. It seemed lowering it had been a mistake. He then asked if there was anything else he should be worried about. The physician reassured him that the examination revealed no other health concerns. More importantly, he had avoided irreversible damage to his heart because the blue pills had been administered in time. Truly, it was a tremendous relief. The blue pills? The man looked confused. Had he taken them? The physician confirmed that he had. In fact, 2 pills had been used, exactly as prescribed. They verified it by checking the number of pills remaining in his pocket. The man's eyes widened. No, he was absolutely certain he had not taken the medicine himself. Suddenly, fragmented memories resurfaced. A voice, someone desperately trying to save him. Then realization struck him. Was that not a dream? He slowly placed a hand over his chest. The physician remarked that he had been truly blessed. Confused, he asked what he meant. The physician apologized for speaking so boldly but explained that if not for the person who treated him, he most likely would not have survived. The situation had been that critical. Whoever provided first aid had done so flawlessly. The treatment had been incredibly skilled. In the physician's opinion, a medical expert must have been nearby. To think that someone with such knowledge happened to be present was practically a miracle. The man immediately replied that he needed to thank this person. Who was this doctor that had saved his life? Was it a physician from the East? The physician shook his head. He did not know. By the time they found him, only one person had been present. A maid. A maid. You are the maid I ran into back then. Have you been taking good care of my jacket? Hearing those words immediately caught Mary off guard. Why, of all people, did it have to be him again? She had only just managed to escape the crown prince's attention, and now this unexpected situation was unfolding. Trying her best to remain composed, she politely greeted him. Greetings, King Johannes of the Western Empire. My name is Mary. Please rest assured that we are currently in the process of cleaning your jacket. Johannes thanked her and explained that he had called for her because there was something he wished to ask. Mary replied that she was at his service and that he could speak freely. Johannes smiled and told her not to worry. Speaking formally was simply a habit of his when dealing with people he was not close to. Despite his pleasant tone, Mary remained on guard. This was no ordinary noble. This was Johannes III, the king of the Western Empire, a ruler whose rise to power had been accompanied by bloodshed and conflict. Through sheer determination and ruthless decisions, he had dragged the Western Empire out of chaos and unified it under his rule. He was known throughout the continent as a cold-blooded monarch who would use any means necessary to accomplish his goals. On his very first day as king, he reportedly executed a duke without hesitation for showing him disrespect. Stories of his conquests and victories were known far and wide. This was not someone she could afford to underestimate. Johannes then asked her a simple question. He had heard that she was the person who found him unconscious. By any chance, had she seen anyone else nearby at the time? Mary calmly replied that when she arrived at the balcony, he had been the only person there. No one else had been present. Johannes listened carefully. According to the physician, someone had performed flawless first aid and then vanished without leaving the slightest trace behind. Looking at Mary, he did not believe she was lying. But if that was the case, then who had saved him? What kind of doctor could have appeared and disappeared so mysteriously? Meanwhile, Mary felt her anxiety growing. Unless she had somehow miraculously gained the ability to help people overnight, things only seemed to be getting more complicated with each passing day. Johannes called her name again. Miss Mary. Yes, Your Majesty? Mary desperately hoped he would simply dismiss her and allow her to leave. Instead, he asked if she could come a little closer. Pardon me? Please come over here for a moment. There is something I wish to check. It will not take long. Mary hesitated. Nevertheless, She slowly stepped forward. Johannes asked her to come a bit closer. More than this? She asked nervously. Yes, just a little closer. Before she realized it, she was standing directly in front of him. What is this? She wondered. Then Johannes politely excused himself and suddenly reached out to hold her hands. Mary immediately flinched in surprise. Your Majesty, what are you doing? Johannes calmly replied that he only needed a moment. Please wait, just for a moment. Your Majesty, please let go. Startled and embarrassed, Mary quickly pulled her hands away. Johannes immediately apologized for his rudeness. There was simply something he wanted to confirm. Her hands seemed incredibly delicate and beautiful, so he wanted to examine them more closely. Just as I thought, he muttered. What? Mary asked in confusion. Miss Mary, you. Before he could finish his sentence, the door suddenly opened. What the hell are you doing? The room instantly fell silent as Crown Prince Rael stepped inside. His cold gaze swept across the room before landing directly on Johannes. Once again, he demanded an explanation. What exactly were you doing just now? Johannes casually greeted him. Greetings, Your Highness, the Crown Prince. Ignoring the greeting entirely, Rael turned his attention to Mary. Mary, come over here. Yes? I'm telling you to come over here. Mary immediately obeyed and hurried behind Rael, instinctively placing him between herself and Johannes. Rael then remarked that he had heard rumors that Johannes was unwell, but judging by his appearance, those rumors were clearly false. Johannes replied with a smile that it was a pleasure to see him. However, he found it a little disappointing that Rael seemed so unhappy despite it having been such a long time since they last met. Rael glared at him without the slightest warmth. We are not friends. Then his voice grew even colder. You entered here without permission and touched something that belongs to me. Give me one reason why I should be pleased. Both Mary and Johannes froze at those words. Even Mary was shocked by what she had just heard. Johannes stared at Rael for a moment before smiling faintly. Truthfully, Rael admitted that he would like nothing more than to throw him out of the room immediately. However, considering Johannes's health condition, he would let the matter slide this time. Still, Johannes should be more careful with his actions if he did not want his stay in the Eastern Empire cut short. As soon as he recovered his strength, Rael intended to send him home. Johannes calmly replied that he would keep that in mind. After all these years, Rael's temper remained as terrible as ever. Yet despite the confrontation, Johannes could not stop thinking about Mary. To think that Rael would react like this. In any case, he could not be certain yet, but that maid was suspicious. Very suspicious. Perhaps he should remain here a little longer after all. Meanwhile, Mary suddenly felt uncomfortable for reasons she could not explain. Why did she feel so terrible all of a sudden? Perhaps she should return to her duties as soon as possible. Just as she prepared to leave, Rael suddenly stopped walking and turned around. Your Highness? She asked. Rael paused for a moment before simply saying that it was nothing. Then he dismissed her and told her she could leave. Mary bowed politely. As she turned away, she thought she heard him say something. Be careful from now on. Did he really say that? Before she could think further, Rael was already walking away, leaving Mary standing there more confused than ever. As the festival continued, the palace remained busier than ever. Orders came from every direction. Excuse me, could you bring some refreshments over here? Mary immediately replied that she would and asked them to wait a moment. This time, she had deliberately stationed herself outside the main banquet hall so that she would not accidentally run into Crown Prince Rael again. However, the work outside was proving just as exhausting. There were guests everywhere, and requests never seemed to stop. While carrying refreshments, she suddenly noticed a familiar figure nearby. Oh, that person is Sir Kyle. Kyle noticed her as well and greeted her warmly. Miss Mary? Mary smiled and returned the greeting. Kyle immediately noticed her new uniform and pointed out that she had been promoted. It was nice to see her again. He asked whether she had been well. Mary replied that she had and politely asked the same question in return. Kyle remarked that he could see she had become a middle-ranked maid and congratulated her. Mary thanked him sincerely before asking what brought him there. This was the first time she had seen him wearing a knight's uniform. Kyle explained that he was currently on duty. Since he was a member of the Royal Guard, it was only natural that he would be working even during the festival. Mary commented that it must be tiring to work during such a large celebration. Kyle smiled and replied that the same could be said for her. She looked quite busy herself. He then asked whether she was assigned to work in that area. Mary explained that she was, at least for the time being. After a brief conversation, she apologized and explained that she needed to return to work. She promised she would come back later if time allowed. Kyle told her not to worry and reminded her not to overwork herself. However, before leaving, Mary suddenly stopped and handed him something. What is this? Kyle asked. Mary explained that she had prepared it for him in case he became hungry while on duty. She thought he might not have had a proper meal yet. Kyle looked genuinely touched. First she had made cookies for him, and now she was doing this as well. He told her that she was far too kind and sincerely thanked her. Later, after finishing some of her tasks, Mary returned. The weather had become quite pleasant. The summer heat had passed, leaving behind a cool and refreshing evening breeze. The moon hung beautifully in the night sky. Kyle agreed that the weather was wonderful. As the two stood there talking, Mary realized something. Even though they were not discussing anything particularly important, she always felt comfortable around him. There was something calming about his presence. Curious, she asked whether he would continue working at that post. Kyle explained that it was not actually his original assignment. The people who normally worked there were unable to attend that evening, and since everyone else was occupied, he was temporarily filling in. Before Mary could say anything else, someone suddenly called for Kyle. It seemed trouble had found them. A small voice complained loudly, "Where did you go?" Then another voice added that Kyle was so handsome that he could almost be mistaken for a little girl. Mary immediately turned toward the newcomer. "Greetings, Prince Oscar." The young prince puffed out his chest proudly. Mary quickly bowed and introduced herself. "Greetings, 10th Prince. I am Maid Mary." Oscar stared at her suspiciously before asking who she was. "Pardon?" Mary replied, confused. "What is an ugly girl like you doing with Kyle? Kyle should be playing with me. Kyle is mine. He should always be with me." Mary blinked in disbelief. The prince was talking about Kyle as if he were an object. Kyle calmly stepped in and explained that Miss Mary had been a great help to him. Oscar immediately became upset. Was Kyle saying that this ugly girl was more important than him? The prince glared at Mary with open hostility. Kyle quickly reassured him that was not the case. Of course he cherished Prince Oscar. After all, the prince was one of his closest and dearest friends. However, Miss Mary was his friend as well. Then Kyle suggested that perhaps Oscar should become friends with Mary too. Oscar immediately crossed his arms and refused. He liked Kyle the best and did not need any other friends. Watching the exchange, Mary could not help thinking that the prince was undeniably adorable, though perhaps not particularly well-mannered. Eventually, Oscar dragged Kyle away to watch a performance. "Watch carefully. It is a new trick I came up with." A magician stood proudly on stage demonstrating his act. Oscar immediately criticized him, claiming it was the most basic trick imaginable. He insisted that if given the chance, he could show everyone real magic. As the performance continued, Mary returned to her duties. Some time later, a familiar voice called out to her again. "Hey, you." Mary turned around and immediately recognized Prince Oscar. Wasn't he the prince from earlier? She politely greeted him and asked what he was doing there. Oscar proudly announced that he was attending the banquet. Then he declared that he wanted to ask her something and that she should feel honored that he had chosen to ask her personally. Mary humored him and told him to ask anything he wished. Oscar immediately demanded to know where the banquet hall was. Mary blinked in surprise. The banquet hall was located inside Gloria Hall. Then she suddenly realized something alarming. Wait a moment. Why was Prince Oscar here alone? There was no bodyguard, butler, maid, or attendant in sight. Carefully, she asked whether he had come by himself. Oscar casually replied that he did not have anyone like that. Mary was shocked. Pardon? However, Oscar immediately told her to stop asking questions. She was an ugly maid, and her job was simply to take him to the banquet hall. Mary reluctantly guided him toward Gloria Hall and showed him the entrance. "There. You can enter the banquet hall from here." Oscar nodded proudly before walking inside. "Good job." However, as Mary watched him leave, something suddenly felt strange. Why was the royal crier silent? Why was nobody announcing his arrival? Looking around, she slowly remembered something important. Prince Oscar was Mary. She cooks well, and apparently she can do magic too. It almost felt like a waste of talent to have her working as a mere maid. As Rail thought back on everything that had happened, he realized that both mysterious incidents had occurred when Mary was nearby. The sculpture incident and the musical composition. The timing was too strange to simply ignore. As he pondered the matter, his attention suddenly shifted and he froze. Wait, why is that bastard approaching Mary? What could they possibly be talking about? From a distance, he watched the two of them speaking together. Kyle mentioned that he had seen Prince Oscar with her earlier. Mary politely replied that she had and then thanked Sir Kyle for looking after the young prince. Bowing respectfully, she expressed her gratitude. Kyle smiled warmly and told her that ever since the first day they met, he had always thought of her as a lovely and kind person. Hearing those words made Mary blush slightly. How could he say such embarrassing things so casually while smiling like that? Kyle continued by explaining that Prince Oscar was a very lonely child. He was grateful for the kindness Mary had shown him because, until now, he had been one of the only people who regularly spoke with the young prince. Hearing that made Mary curious. How had Sir Kyle become so close to Prince Oscar in the first place? After hesitating for a moment, she decided to ask something that had been on her mind. She apologized in advance if she was being too forward but asked if she could know his full name. For a brief moment, Kyle froze. Knights of the Imperial Bodyguards were required to wear their uniforms at all times. The captain of the Imperial Bodyguards was the only exception, but the captain should have had no reason to be wandering around a place like Swan Garden. She had assumed he was merely a squire. After a brief pause, Kyle finally introduced himself properly. His full name was Keelhan de Seton. He then apologized for not revealing his identity sooner and explained that he had never intended to hide it from her. The moment Mary heard the name, her eyes widened in surprise. Standing before her was none other than Lord Keelhan de Seton, the protector of the Empire and head of the Imperial Bodyguards. Immediately, Mary lowered herself and offered a respectful bow. She apologized for all of her rude behavior and casual speech up until now. Kyle quickly reassured her that she had never offended him in any way. In fact, he asked if they were not friends. There was no need for her to suddenly become so formal. He wished she would continue speaking to him the same way she always had. However, Mary could not bring herself to do that. How could she? He was one of the Empire's most prominent aristocrats, while she was merely a maid. Their worlds were completely different. She apologized once again and addressed him formally. Kyle's expression softened slightly. He admitted that continuing to insist would probably only make her more uncomfortable. However, he also did not want to pretend that they had never met. Strangely enough, he felt that they understood one another quite well. The more they had talked, the more he had enjoyed spending time with her. Mary quietly admitted that she felt the same way. Even so, Kyle explained that he did not want to burden her with his selfish request. From now on, he would simply think of her as a friend in his heart. Even if it was difficult for her to act casually around him in public, he hoped she could at least consider him a friend in her heart as well. Hearing those words caused Mary to flinch slightly. Meanwhile, from afar, Rael had witnessed the entire conversation. The longer he watched, the more irritated he became. Seeing Mary bow so deeply before Kyle only worsened his mood. He felt strangely uncomfortable watching the scene unfold. I shouldn't be so nosy. I should just turn back, he thought. Yet he couldn't stop looking. Then he saw Mary bow once again. How dare he? Rael clenched his fists. What exactly is going on? How long does he plan to keep her kneeling like that? His irritation continued to grow, much to his own confusion. Get a hold of yourself, Rael, he thought. Why am I feeling so irritated? Just as he turned to leave, he glanced back one final time and saw the two of them smiling and laughing together. For some reason, that sight irritated him even more. Maestro! Miss Mary! It has been quite some time. Have you been doing well? Hearing the familiar voice, Mary turned around and saw Bahan. She immediately congratulated him after hearing that he had officially become the royal conductor. Bahan thanked her but humbly admitted that he did not believe someone as inexperienced and uneducated as himself deserved such a prestigious title while that mysterious individual was still out there somewhere. Hearing those words caused Mary to flinch slightly. Even now, he still had not given up on finding the person responsible for helping him complete his symphony. Trying to change the subject, Mary asked if he would be performing with the Imperial Orchestra at the banquet that evening. Bahan nodded and explained that he would. Since the banquet would begin soon, he was currently making preparation. Curious, Mary glanced around and noticed that none of the orchestra members were present. When she asked where everyone was, Bahan explained that they had gone to retrieve their instruments. They should have returned by now, although it seemed they were running a little late. Mary nodded in understanding. Before the conversation could continue, another maid hurried over and handed Mary a task. She was asked to take care of something immediately. Mary apologized and prepared to leave. Before going, she wished Bahan luck with the performance and told him that she was looking forward to hearing the orchestra play. Bahan thanked her warmly and wished her luck with her own work as well. As Mary walked through the halls, she found herself entering a dark storage room. The tablecloth she had been sent to retrieve should have been somewhere inside. While searching through the room, her eyes suddenly landed on something unexpected. A collection of beautiful masks rested nearby. So these were the masks for the upcoming masked ball. Curious, Mary picked one up and gently placed it over her face. It only covered the area around her eyes. Looking at herself for a moment, she couldn't help but smile. After today's banquet and the masked ball 2 days later, everything would finally be over. She honestly wished it would all end quickly so she could finally rest. However, despite wanting to relax, a feeling of unease lingered in her chest. She had another dream recently. Every time she dreamed, something unusual seemed to happen afterward. Because of that, she could not shake the feeling that something might go wrong tonight. More than anything, she hoped the banquet would end peacefully without any incidents. As she continued searching the room, she suddenly noticed something else hidden in the shadows. There was an old piano sitting quietly in the corner. Mary tilted her head in confusion. When had they moved this old piano here? She thought the newer piano had already been transferred to the other hall. Although the instrument looked old, it was surprisingly well maintained. Unable to resist her curiosity, she gently touched one of the keys. A clear note echoed through the room. The sudden sound startled her. Even so, it still seemed to be in excellent condition. For a brief moment, Mary found herself tempted. Then she immediately slapped her own hand and scolded herself. No, don't even think about trying something silly, Mary. Quickly shaking those thoughts away, she resumed searching for the tablecloth and hurried out of the room. However, the moment she returned, chaos had already erupted. Mary arrived carrying the tablecloth, only to find everyone in a panic. One of the maids immediately informed her that they had much bigger problems now. A fire had suddenly broken out. Mary's eyes widened in shock. A fire? How could a fire break out now of all times? The banquet was about to begin. Meanwhile, Count Gilbert was absolutely furious. Of all days, this had to happen on the day of the banquet. Nobles from across the nation and foreign dignitaries from other empires would all be present. As servants rushed around frantically, it became clear what the problem was. Some of the orchestra's instruments had been affected, forcing them to bring replacement instruments from storage. If only they could delay the performance a little longer. Hearing the commotion, Mary realized the problem involved the orchestra. However, postponing the performance was impossible. This was not some small neighborhood tea party. This was one of the grandest banquets in the empire. Everyone looked toward Count Gilbert, waiting for his decision. One of the attendants asked for orders, but Gilbert immediately demanded silence so he could think. After a tense moment, he finally made his decision. The performance would proceed as planned. Any music was better than no music at all. Unfortunately, the replacement instruments were severely lacking. There was only a single violin, a single viola, and a single cello available. Mary immediately realized the problem. No matter how talented the musicians were, those few instruments would never be enough. Their sounds would be completely drowned out by the conversations of hundreds of nobles. Guests had already begun whispering among themselves, wondering why the performance had not started. Watching the situation unfold made Mary anxious. She could not simply stand there and watch the banquet's performance be ruined. If there truly was a god watching over her, then she wished for a miracle. Suddenly, a thought crossed her mind. Before she could second-guess herself, Mary rushed upstairs toward the old piano. Taking a seat before the instrument, she placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. Almost instantly, the hall fell silent. A beautiful prelude filled the air. The melody was elegant, soothing, and breathtakingly beautiful. Guests throughout the banquet hall froze as the music flowed around them. Many of them had never heard anything quite like it before. Some whispered that it felt as though an angel had descended among them. Others admitted that it was the first time music had moved their hearts so deeply. The entire hall became captivated by the performance. Even Crown Prince Rael was stunned. The moment he heard the melody, recognition flashed across his face. This music. It was the exact same melody he had heard that night at the Crystal Palace. Meanwhile, Mary continued playing while growing increasingly nervous. She could not allow herself to be discovered. She needed to finish quickly and return downstairs before anyone noticed. Fortunately, the opening prelude of a celebration typically lasted only 3 to 5 minutes. If she timed it correctly, she could finish, return to her duties, and pretend she had been serving guests the entire time. More importantly, the maestro would now have enough time to reorganize the musicians and begin the dance performance. As the final notes echoed through the hall, thunderous applause erupted from the audience. Guests praised the performance and called it magnificent. The moment the music ended, Mary immediately stood up. Without wasting a second, she hurried toward the stairs. Her plan was simple. She would return to the second floor, blend in with the servants, and act as though she had been working all along. Nobody would suspect a thing. Quietly moving through the hallway, she thought she had escaped unnoticed. Then suddenly, a voice stopped her in her tracks. "Who's there?" Mary froze. Her heart nearly stopped. Slowly turning around, she saw someone climbing the stairs toward her. It was Rael. The Crown Prince was standing there, and Mary could only stand there in complete shock. After hearing the beautiful prelude, Rael immediately rushed upstairs toward the old piano. The moment he arrived, he pressed one of the keys and listened carefully. The key felt stiff beneath his finger. Yet despite the condition of the instrument, that mysterious person had still managed to play such a beautiful piece. Rael looked around the room and wondered if they had already escaped. He had rushed there as fast as possible after hearing the performance end. Lifting curtains, opening doors, and checking every corner, he searched thoroughly. If the pianist had left immediately after finishing the performance, he should have seen them leaving. That meant there was only one possibility. The person had to still be somewhere on the third floor. Rail continued searching every possible hiding place. However, no matter where he looked, he found nothing. Meanwhile, Mary was hiding inside a closet nearby, barely daring to breathe. Her heart pounded wildly as she listened to his footsteps. Fortunately, after searching the area, Rail eventually turned away and walked off. Several moments later, Mary carefully opened the closet door and peeked outside. Is he gone? She wondered nervously. She had truly believed she would get caught this time. Letting out a sigh of relief, she quickly stepped out. There was no time to waste. She needed to return downstairs before anyone else noticed her absence. Not long afterward, someone called out to her. Mary, where were you? She immediately apologized and explained that she had something she needed to attend to. The head maid ordered her to return to her station immediately and continue working. Mary obeyed at once. Internally, she felt nothing but relief. She did not know what she would have done if Rail had discovered her. As the banquet continued, conversations about the mysterious pianist quickly spread throughout the palace. Guests discussed the performance excitedly. Some wondered who exactly had played that beautiful prelude. Others admitted that while the Imperial Orchestra had performed wonderfully, they still wished they could hear that piano piece again. Before long, someone suggested that perhaps it was the work of the rumored angel. Hearing that word immediately caught everyone's attention. Angel? Haven't you heard the rumors? People have been saying that an angel descended to bring blessings to the imperial palace. The guests began exchanging stories. Some talked about the statue of the third empress that had somehow been completed overnight during a rainy evening when nobody was around. Others spoke about the mysterious completion of the Countryside Symphony. The rumors only grew more exaggerated with every retelling. Some nobles even joked that they planned to pray to the angel that evening and hoped the angel might visit their own estates next. Hearing all of this made Mary increasingly uncomfortable. An angel? She never imagined people would start calling her that. Just thinking about how close she came to being caught made her stomach twist. Deciding she had heard enough, she quickly left the area. However, before she could go far, someone suddenly approached her from behind. The news they delivered immediately wiped away every other thought in her mind. Jane had been thrown into prison. Mary froze. Since she lived with Jane, someone thought she deserved to know. Apparently, Jane had been responsible for checking the lamp lights in the instrument storage room that caught fire the previous night. Even if it had been an accident, causing a fire inside the imperial palace was considered a serious crime. She would not be forgiven easily. Without wasting another second, Mary rushed to the prison. Upon arriving, she found Jane crying uncontrollably. The moment she saw Mary, she grabbed onto her desperately. Jane insisted that she had done nothing wrong. She had checked all the lamps before leaving. Yet now everyone was blaming her. Through tears and sobs, she asked Mary what would happen to her. What if her punishment was something terrible? Why was this happening? Mary tried her best to calm her down. Unlike herself, Jane was a diligent and responsible worker. If Jane claimed everything had been checked properly, then Mary believed her completely. She asked again whether Jane was certain everything had been in order before she left. Jane immediately nodded. She had checked multiple times. That was exactly why she could not understand how a fire had broken out. Hearing that answer caused Mary to think carefully. If Jane was telling the truth, then perhaps this had not been an ordinary fire at all. The timing alone was suspicious. Why would a fire suddenly break out inside the Imperial Orchestra's storage room on the very day of the banquet? The more she thought about it, the less sense it made. Furthermore, the candles used in the storage room were specially designed to prevent fires. They were arranged securely and could not easily tip over even if shaken. So how had the fire started? The possibilities slowly formed in Mary's mind. Could someone have deliberately set the fire? Could it have been arson? Jane explained that everyone kept saying the evidence remained at the scene of the crime. If there was any chance of proving her innocence, it would be through a proper investigation. Hearing that, Mary made up her mind. She told Jane not to worry. She would take care of it. Jane stared at her in confusion and asked what she meant. However, before she could explain further, Mary was already heading for the door. She had decided exactly what she needed to do. If she wanted to prove Jane's innocence, then she had to show that something suspicious had happened with the fire itself. The answers she needed would be at the scene of the fire. Rushing through the palace, Mary soon arrived at the sealed storage room. However, a knight stopped her before she could enter. He demanded to know why a maid had come there. Thinking quickly, Mary claimed that she had accidentally left something important inside and wanted to check whether it was still there. In truth, it was a complete lie, but she needed to get inside somehow. Unfortunately, the knight refused. Nobody was allowed to enter. Mary then asked why a knight of the imperial bodyguards was guarding the area. Normally, knights were not assigned to investigate fires. The knight responded that it was none of her business. However, some irregularities had been discovered, and further investigation was now required. Irregularities? Hearing that only strengthened Mary's suspicions. Even so, the knight made it clear that the area was closed off and ordered her to leave. Mary felt increasingly desperate. What was she supposed to do now? If she wanted to save Jane, she had to investigate the storage room herself. Just as she was struggling to think of a solution, a familiar voice suddenly called out behind her. "Miss Mary?" Instantly recognizing the voice, Mary turned around. Standing there was none other than Lord Kyle. Relief immediately appeared on her face as she looked at him. "My Lord Kyle," she said. "Kyle! It feels wrong to take advantage of my connections, but for Jane's sake, I need to investigate this myself." Mary looked at him and asked if it would be all right for her to go inside and look for something. She explained that it was extremely important to her. The guard immediately refused. Outsiders were not allowed anywhere near the scene of the fire. Technically, even civilians were prohibited from entering. However, Kyle stepped forward and calmly stated that he could accompany her. If anything went wrong, he would personally take responsibility for it. Hearing that, Mary apologized for causing such a nuisance. Kyle simply shook his head and told her not to worry. In fact, he needed to enter the area himself because there were a few things he still wanted to inspect. After a brief pause, Mary carefully asked him another question. By any chance, did he think this was an act of arson? Kyle fell silent for a moment. He explained that while he was guarding the scene and His Highness had personally come to investigate, there was still no concrete evidence proving that the fire had been deliberately started. However, he admitted that the timing of the incident was undeniably suspicious. For a fire to break out in that particular location on the very day of the grand banquet felt far too convenient. If it had truly been intentional, then there was a strong possibility that it had been done by one of the Crown Prince's enemies. Kyle reassured her not to worry too much because matters like these were the responsibility of the Royal Guard. Mary nodded respectfully and addressed him as Lord Kyle. He suddenly stopped and looked at her. Pardon? When they were alone together, he wanted her to simply call him Kyle. Surely she could do that when it was only the two of them. Mary immediately became flustered and admitted that doing something like that would be difficult. Before she could say anything else, they arrived at the storage room. Everything inside had been reduced to blackened remains. The damage was extensive. Kyle suggested they begin their search. Mary nodded firmly. She was determined to prove Jane's innocent, eliminate all other possibilities, and whatever remains must be the truth. Looking around at the burned wreckage, she felt frustrated. Nearly everything had been destroyed. If this section of the room had survived, perhaps Jane would never have become the prime suspect. Still, it was too early to give up. As she carefully sifted through the ashes and debris, she continued examining every detail she could find. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that Jane was innocent. Suddenly, Kyle approached her. Had she found what she was looking for? Mary turned toward him and answered that she had not. Kyle remarked that it was unfortunate she had lost something important and asked whether it could be replaced. Mary barely heard him. Her thoughts were racing. She was now completely certain that this had been arson. The evidence might be subtle, but it was there. She needed to finish her investigation and return to Jane as quickly as possible. However, another problem remained. Even if she discovered the truth, would anyone believe her? She had no authority whatsoever to interfere with an official Royal Guard investigation. Still, if it was Kyle, perhaps he would at least listen. Gathering her courage, she asked if she could tell him something. Kyle immediately agreed and encouraged her to speak freely. Just as Mary was about to explain her theory, another voice suddenly interrupted them. Is the investigation progressing well? The moment she heard that voice, her heart nearly stopped. Mary slowly turned around. Standing there was none other than the Crown Prince himself. Kyle immediately greeted him respectfully. Of all people, it had to be the Crown Prince. Rael asked whether they had discovered any evidence connecting the witness to the incident. Kyle apologized and explained that the fire had been so destructive that very little usable evidence remained. Hearing that clearly displeased the Crown Prince, he stated that he was certain those bastards had been nearby when the fire started. What annoyed him most was the fact that they had not left behind any evidence. The witness in question was a Westerner. If someone from the Western Empire truly was involved, then the matter could quickly become a diplomatic disaster. Relations between the two empires were already terrible. It would not be unreasonable to suspect that someone had deliberately targeted the grand banquet. Yet despite that possibility, Rael still felt that the true culprit might be someone else entirely. Before he could continue his thoughts, Kyle reminded him that Mary had something she wished to say regarding the fire. Rael immediately turned his attention toward her. You have something to say? Then speak. Mary froze. Was it really alright to tell the Crown Prince? Doing so would undoubtedly attract even more attention toward herself. the very thing she had been trying to avoid for years. However, she had no other choice. If she remained silent, then Jane would be punished for a crime she never committed. Taking a deep breath, Mary finally spoke. She stated that she believed the fire had not been an accident. It had been arson. Both Kyle and Rael immediately focused on her. The Crown Prince's expression hardened. On what grounds do you make such a claim? He warned her that this was not a trivial matter. If she made accusations without evidence, she could face serious punishment. Mary did not back down. She calmly replied that she did, in fact, have evidence. The statement shocked both Kyle and the Crown Prince. For a moment, silence filled the burned storage room. Then Rael looked directly at her and ordered her to continue. Good. Then speak. I will hear you out. It's actually quite simple. You can tell that the fire was arson because of the location of the ignition point. If you examine the scene carefully, the answer becomes obvious. In the basement cellar, there are 2 lamps mounted on the walls. At first glance, it would be reasonable to assume that the fire started from one of those lamps. However, while investigating the damage, I noticed evidence of a separate source of ignition. Something else caught fire first and scorched the wall before the blaze spread throughout the room. Mary pointed toward the damaged section of the cellar as she explained her theory. Immediately, Rael questioned her. How do you know that? Before Mary could answer, another voice entered the conversation. I'm quite curious about that as well. How exactly did you figure it out? The speaker was none other than Johannes III, King of the Western Empire. The moment Mary saw him approach, she felt a headache coming on. The situation was becoming increasingly complicated. All she had wanted was to save Jane, yet somehow the matter was turning into a dispute between 2 empires. Internally, she begged for patience. Rael immediately frowned at Johannes. He reminded him that he had already warned him not to act recklessly if he wished to avoid being expelled from the palace. Johannes simply smiled. He explained that he had been resting when he heard an absurd rumor claiming that the Western Empire had started a fire to sabotage the grand banquet. Naturally, hearing such nonsense had upset him. Rael replied that Count Schober of the Western Empire had been spotted near the scene around the time the fire started. Johannes calmly answered that the significance of that fact would only become clear after listening to what Mary had to say. Taking a deep breath, Mary continued her explanation. First, she pointed toward a damaged violin. The burn marks on the instrument were directed toward the wall. It was not just the violin either. Several nearby instruments and supply crates showed the same pattern. If the fire had originated from the wall lamps, the burn damage should have spread in the opposite direction. The evidence simply did not match that conclusion. Johannes admitted that the observation was interesting, but he argued that it still was not enough to prove arson. Was there any additional evidence? Mary nodded. There was. The collapsed pillar nearby was another clue. If the fire had started from the lamp, the pillar should have fallen in the opposite direction. Normally, when a wooden support weakens because of fire, it collapses toward the side that burned first. The direction of the fall suggested a completely different point of origin. Beyond that, there were even more clues. Mary knelt beside the burned remains and pointed towards several traces hidden among the ashes. At the point of ignition, the flames should have spread naturally by consuming nearby flammable materials. However, the burn patterns and residue did not support that theory. Instead, they indicated a very specific path taken by the flames. Carefully connecting every piece of evidence together, Mary pointed toward a particular location. This was where the fire had truly started. Furthermore, she had discovered physical evidence suggesting deliberate arson. It came in the form of candle drippings. The moment she revealed them, everyone focused on the small hardened wax remnants. Candle drippings? Rael immediately understood. The culprit had likely used a candle to ignite the fire. That alone strongly supported the theory of arson. Kyle looked at Mary with amazement. She had discovered clues that an entire investigation team had overlooked. Rael stared at her in silence. Mary, you are. Before he could finish, Johannes suddenly began clapping. How surprising. How wonderful. To arrive at such a conclusion from nothing more than a pile of ashes. Truly fascinating. As he watched her, a different thought crossed his mind. While searching for Princess Marina, he had unexpectedly discovered someone incredibly interesting. The more he learned about Mary, the more curious he became. He even found himself wanting to take her back to the Western Empire. There was also the matter of the medical emergency. Could this woman truly be unrelated to that incident as well? Mary, meanwhile, felt increasingly uneasy. The Western Emperor was the last person she wanted to attract attention from. In some ways, he was even more dangerous than the Crown Prince. Johannes then asked another question. Did she have evidence identifying the culprit as well? Hearing that made Mary nervous. She suddenly felt as though she had gone too far. Perhaps she should simply stop now and admit she did not know. However, events had already progressed beyond that point. Johannes remarked that if no culprit could be identified, then naturally the most suspicious suspects would be questioned first. Rael immediately understood the implication. Johannes was suggesting that the Eastern Empire intended to accuse the Western delegation without proper evidence. Rael replied that whether the accusations were false or not would be determined during the investigation. It remained true that Count Schober had been the closest person to the fire. Johannes responded calmly, asking whether the Western Empire was expected to quietly accept unreasonable accusation. He casually mentioned the thousands of knights stationed along the border and the sharp spears they carried. He wondered aloud whether an empire exhausted from civil war would be prepared to deal with them. Rael immediately accused him of making threats. Johannes smiled and replied that Rael seemed to be proposing the same thing. The atmosphere instantly became tense. Mary began trembling. If this continued, the conflict could escalate into something much worse. Unable to remain silent, she spoke up once more. Count Schober was probably not the culprit. There was a very high chance that someone else was responsible. Everyone turned toward her again. Mary pointed toward the ground. The footprints were the key. Looking carefully, she had noticed a strange set of prints among the others. Compared to the surrounding footprints, these were significantly smaller. They were not even half the size of most adult footprints. It was almost as if they belonged to a child. More importantly, unlike the other footprints that moved both into and out of the room, these only pointed outward. Most of the prints had been partially erased by the countless people who entered after the fire, but traces still remained. Since the entrance had been sealed shortly afterward, a person with such a small stature should have been easily noticed. This suggested that the footprints had been left shortly before the fire began. Mary then pointed toward the damaged candelabra. The iron handle contained several chips and cracks. Based on its condition, the culprit likely had little experience handling such an object. That suggested someone of relatively high status who normally did not perform manual tasks themselves. Furthermore, the area had been crowded with servants and guests preparing for the banquet. If an unfamiliar person had been seen carrying a candelabra, witnesses would have noticed immediately. Since nobody reported anything suspicious, there was a strong chance that the culprit was someone already familiar to the palace staff. The only thing Mary still could not determine was the motive. Looking at the evidence, there was no sign of a sophisticated plan. The materials used to start the fire were not especially flammable, and the method itself seemed careless. For that reason, she believed there was a strong possibility that the arson had actually been accidental. Once she finished speaking, silence filled the room. Johannes stared at her with undisguised fascination. Incredible, truly incredible. The more he listened, the more he wanted to bring her back to the Western Empire. Eventually, Rael broke the silence. He acknowledged everything she had said. Although her conclusions could not yet be confirmed without identifying the culprit, her observations would undoubtedly be invaluable to the investigation. If her theory proved correct, they might be able to arrest the culprit very soon. As Rael considered the evidence, a single suspect suddenly came to mind. Nearby, Kyle's eyes widened. Impossible. Could that person really be responsible? Mary felt relieved knowing that Jane's name had finally been cleared. Not only that, but they had also managed to avoid a potential conflict with the Western Empire. However, something still bothered her. Why had Lord Kyle looked so flustered earlier? The culprit matched the description perfectly. A child-sized person, someone familiar with every corner of the palace, and someone recognized by almost everyone. The more she thought about it, the more obvious the answer seemed. It could not have been anyone else but Prince Oscar. Had he really done it? Was it possible that he had been acting out because of the loneliness and isolation he endured every day? As Mary remained lost in thought, Kyle suddenly spoke. He told her not to worry so much. Mary looked up in surprise. Kyle explained that despite what many servants said, His Majesty was not nearly as terrible as the rumors claimed. Stories about him drinking the blood of young girls and other ridiculous tales were completely absurd. Mary quickly replied that she had not been thinking about that. Kyle simply told her they should go. As they walked, Mary could not help wondering if he had been trying to reassure her. Before long, they arrived at the Crown Prince's office. Kyle announced that he had brought Miss Mary. Rael granted them permission to enter. The moment Mary stepped inside, Rael instructed her to come closer. He informed her that they had successfully identified the culprit thanks to her help. Mary immediately tried to downplay her contribution, saying that it was nothing. Rael disagreed. Including the incident at the banquet, this was now the second time she had helped the Empire. He could not simply ignore her efforts. Therefore, he wanted to know if there was anything she wished for. The moment he asked, Mary immediately thought of the Lion Palace. Please remove me from the Lion Palace, she thought desperately. This was the perfect opportunity. However, before she could say it, another question slipped from her mouth instead. She apologized for changing the subject but asked if she could know who the culprit was. Rael answered directly. It was Prince Oscar. Hearing that made Mary's heart sink. Rael explained that her observations had been critical to the investigation. Without her, they might never have caught him. Mary then asked whether they knew why Oscar had done it. Rael admitted that they did not know for certain. Oscar claimed that he had been practicing with a candlestick. He insisted that he never intended to ruin the banquet, but he refused to elaborate any further. Practicing? Suddenly, Mary's face paled. Could he have been practicing the vanishing flame trick she had shown him? The realization hit her immediately. It was because of me. What should I do? Panic began building inside her. If Oscar had been imitating one of her magic tricks, then she could not completely deny her involvement. Nervously, she asked what punishment Oscar would receive. Before Rael could answer, one of the nobles nearby coldly remarked that similar offenders had once had their hands cut off. Mary's eyes widened in horror. Rael clarified that the previous offender had been a slave, but the law itself was clear. Anyone who damaged imperial property faced severe punishment, regardless of status. Even members of the royal family were not exempt. The chancellor immediately pressed the issue. He questioned why Rael seemed hesitant. According to him, Oscar should have been eliminated during the Civil War long ago. Keeping him alive had already been an act of mercy. Mary immediately understood what was happening. The chancellor was using this opportunity to get rid of Oscar. As the son of the previous empress, Oscar represented a threat to the future crown princess. Political interests were guiding this entire discussion. Mary looked around the room. Was this truly what everyone wanted? Apparently, it was. Rael explained that while some individuals, including Marquis Keelhan, would object, they were in the minority. Since the evidence clearly pointed to Oscar, there was little they could do. Hearing this made Mary's chest tighten. They were about to hand a terrible punishment to a lonely child because of adult politics. She could not allow that to happen. Before anyone could continue discussing Oscar's sentence, Mary suddenly stepped forward. Your Majesty. The room fell silent. Rael looked at her with curiosity. Mary apologized for interrupting and asked if she could claim the reward he had offered her earlier. Rael told her to continue. Taking a deep breath, Mary stated that she was partially responsible for Oscar's crime. The room immediately erupted in surprise. Rael demanded an explanation. Mary explained that Oscar had challenged her to a magic competition. Since she knew a few tricks, she had demonstrated them for him. She believed that the fire had started while Oscar was attempting to recreate one of those tricks. Therefore, she considered herself responsible for introducing him to the idea. Because of that, she asked Rael to lessen Oscar's punishment and instead punish her alongside him. The entire room fell silent. Rael stared at her for several moments. Mary, do you understand what you just said? Mary nodded. She admitted that she did not know what punishment awaited her, but she could not abandon Oscar. Rael ordered her to stand. He explained that the truth would ultimately be determined after questioning Oscar further. Then he asked her one final time whether she wanted to withdraw her statement. Even if Oscar had copied a trick she showed him, the blame could not reasonably be placed on her. More importantly, unlike Marquis Keelhan, who was Oscar's relative, Mary had no personal connection to him at all. Why was she doing this? Rael demanded an honest answer. Mary trembled slightly. After a moment, she quietly admitted that she was not entirely sure herself. The answer confused everyone. Mary lowered her head and explained that she had simply wanted to help him. There was nothing more to it than that. She apologized because she knew it sounded foolish. Rael stared at her in disbelief. She was willing to suffer for someone else out of nothing more than kindness. Even knowing she could be hurt in the process, she still stepped forward without hesitation. For some reason, seeing that only made him more frustrated. Finally, Rael let out a sigh. Fine. He would grant her request. He had made his decision. Oscar would be imprisoned for 2 months for starting the fire and damaging imperial property. Immediately, one of the officials protested, but Rael silenced him. It was already decided. He had promised to grant Mary's request. Turning toward Orlin, he ordered him to leave first because he needed to discuss something with Mary in private. Orlin reluctantly obeyed and exited the room. Mary thanked Rael sincerely. Rael immediately stopped her. There was no need to thank him. As she had requested, she would be sharing part of Oscar's punishment. Hearing that, Mary straightened herself and prepared for whatever was coming. Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at the crown prince. Please tell me what my punishment is. Why? Why did he insist on being alone with me just to deliver my punishment? Mary trembled nervously as countless thoughts raced to her mind. What kind of terrible punishment was the crown prince planning to give her? Before she could ask, Rael pointed toward the piano standing nearby. Play it. I'll decide your punishment after I hear you perform. The moment she heard those words, her heart skipped a beat. Could it be that he suspected she was the pianist from the 3rd floor? No, that should have been impossible. She had made absolutely certain that nobody saw her leave after playing the prelude. Yet if he was not suspicious, there would be no reason for him to suddenly order her to play the piano. The realization sent a chill down her spine. The Crown Prince. Did he know something? Rael repeated his order and told her to hurry up and play. Mary considered deliberately performing poorly. Perhaps if she made enough mistakes, she could avoid drawing attention to herself. However, she immediately dismissed the idea. If Rael already suspected her, then playing badly on purpose would only make him more suspicious. From what she remembered, he knew a great deal about music. There was no way someone with his knowledge would fail to recognize the difference between a genuinely inexperienced pianist and someone intentionally pretending to be one. The situation left her trapped. Rael noticed her hesitation and asked why she looked so nervous. He told her to simply play anything she wanted. Her punishment would be decided afterward. Mary swallowed hard. What was going on? Eventually, she decided to play a simple piece in a style completely different from the symphony and overture. If she avoided anything too impressive, perhaps she could hide the extent of her abilities. Slowly, she sat down and began to play. The melody was simple and elegant. It lacked the complexity and grandeur of the pieces she had performed before. There were no advanced techniques, no dramatic flourishes, and no difficult passages. It was merely a pleasant song. As Rael listened quietly, he found himself unexpectedly enjoying it. Despite its simplicity, it carried a warmth that was difficult to ignore. For a brief moment, he even considered complimenting her performance. Eventually, the final notes faded away. Mary stood and bowed her head. "Your Majesty, I have finished playing." Rael stared at her for several moments before finally speaking. "It was you. There is no doubt. As I thought, you were the pianist." Mary's entire body froze. Her worst fear had just become reality. Rael stepped forward. "Mary, just who are you?" The question struck her like a bolt of lightning. What did he mean? What exactly did he know? Did he somehow discover that she had saved the Emperor of the Western Empire? Did he know about the statue? Did he know about the symphony? Or worse, had he somehow learned her true identity? Panicking, Mary immediately fell to her knees and apologized. Rael sighed and told her that he was not trying to blame her. He simply could not understand. Why had she worked so hard to hide her talents? Mary desperately tried to think of an answer. "Think, Mary. The Crown Prince still does not know that you are Princess Marina. As long as that secret remains hidden, there is still a way out of this." She quickly explained that she wanted to avoid attracting suspicion. Rael raised an eyebrow. "Suspicion?" Mary nodded. Since she was merely a commoner, she did not want people questioning how someone of her status possessed abilities that did not match her social standing. On top of that, if people began investigating her too deeply, they might discover that she was a prisoner of war. If she had been born into a prestigious noble family, people would have simply called her a genius. However, a commoner displaying extraordinary talents was often treated with suspicion. Rael quietly observed her. "Were you afraid people would accuse you of being a witch?" Mary hesitated before nodding slightly. The explanation made sense, but somehow Rael felt that it was not the whole truth. There was still something about her that he could not understand. No matter how much he learned about Mary, he found himself becoming more curious rather than less. There was something about her that refused to let him look away. Every new discovery only made his thoughts more chaotic. "Who exactly are you? Why do you make me feel this unsettled? The more I learn about you, the harder it becomes to think clearly." For a brief moment, Rael considered simply removing her from his sight. The Empire could not tolerate uncertainty or chaos. Perhaps if he never saw her again, these strange feelings would disappear. However, almost immediately, he rejected that idea. No, there was a much better solution. Rael stood up and looked directly at her. "Mary, I have decided on your punishment." Mary's heart immediately tightened. Rael slowly approached her. "Miss Mary, 3 years ago, a prisoner of war was brought from the Cloven Kingdom. That prisoner became the personal property of Emperor Thorn II. Am I correct?" Mary lowered her head and quietly confirmed that she was indeed considered the Emperor's property. Rael nodded. "Very well. Then I have decided on your punishment. From today onward, I transfer ownership of you from the Emperor to myself, the Crown Prince of the Empire. From this moment forward, you belong to me." Rael looked directly into her stunned eyes as he delivered his final words. "This is the punishment I bestow upon you." The room fell silent. Mary could only stare at him in complete shock as the meaning of his decision slowly began to sink in. "Princess Marina, Maid Mary, from now on, you are mine."